Good morning, staff. Thank you very much for joining us in the chambers instead of the boardroom. This will now be a change for workshop so that it is much more convenient for everyone to do it here rather than in the boardroom. So I will call this meeting to order, and I would like to please ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you all. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Approve the minutes of the regular meeting dated October 15th, 2024.
Excuse me, Mayor. You may want to acknowledge that Councilmember Tuttle is participating remotely.
Thank you, City Manager Bob. Councilmember Becky Tuttle is joining us virtually today, and we acknowledge her presence at this meeting.
Thank you. I'm sorry I can't be there. I'm at the National Business Aviation Association with staff and other community partners representing the city.
Thank you very much for representing us, Councilmember Tuttle. Madam Clerk, can you please call the first item?
Approve the minutes of the regular meeting October 15th, 2024.
Are there any changes or corrections? I see none. I move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of October 15th, 2024.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll. Motion passes. Can we ask Councilmember Tuttle?
Yay.
Motion passes.
Sorry, I thought I was off mute.
Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Consent agenda items 1 through 14.
Are there any items to be pulled? Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'd like to pull item number 11.
Are there any other items to be pulled? I will pull items number 4B, 7, and 13.
Mayor, I'd like to pull item number 14, please.
Thank you.
Was it 4B, 7,
4B, 7,
14?
11, 13, and 14. I motion to approve the consent agenda without 4B, 7, 11, 13, and 14.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll. Councilmember. Thank you very much. Motion passes 7-0. We'll start with 4B in numerical order. This is the Delano pathway. Good morning. Gary Jansen, Public Works Director.
Yes.
First question is regarding the Delano pathway. Can you please talk about how much is the total amount for this project, and how is it being funded, and when will construction end for this project?
Sure, Mayor, council members. Total project cost is around $2.8 million as funded by general obligation bonds from the CIP. Construction is substantially complete at this time. We're installing a pedestrian signal at Seneca. That's expected to be installed hopefully by the end of the month. There's some landscaping that's currently on hold as a result of the drought. Some of the public art component as part of the project is expected to be installed by mid-November. So maybe except for some of the landscaping portions, we would expect everything to be complete by the end of November.
And this is also the pathway that will have a dog park. Can you explain the changes in this work order?
So within this change order itself, the main change is the natural grass area within the dog park will be converted to artificial turf due to some drainage issues. We're also changing the berm height, would be reduced for ease of future care and maintenance. And this is the only dog park area along this project.
Do you foresee any further change orders for this project?
Not at this time. I think with where we're at on construction, you never know what happens on projects, but right now I don't think we'd expect any additional costs.
Councilmember Johnson? Thank you very much, Gary. That's all I had for item number 4B. The next one is item number 7. This is childcare licensing. Gary again.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you talk about this change, how this complies with KDHE, and what type of, I guess, staff coordination this requires for this to now become a change in our own ordinance?
This item is fairly straightforward to align with a change that KDHE made as far as licensing of child care providers. So we're moving everything into one category. We currently have 2 categories, including licensed daycare home, group licensed daycare home. All of that is moving into what is now called a family child care home classification, which will align with and match what KDHE has. So I think it'll probably clean things up. What it does too is it allows all providers then that they could go up to, including 12, from what they had as 10 as far as their license capacity. So what this does, and part of the item today, is an $11 a year increase for approximately 246 facilities that had previously been the licensed daycare home. So the fees for all of these will be the same as what had been the group licensed daycare. Again, I know that starts to create a little bit of confusion, all rolled into family child care home classification. I don't think from a staffing perspective necessarily that this changes a lot for us because we're still following the same guidelines through KDHE, working closely with them. So I do have staff here if you've got any other questions that they can help answer.
Just wanted to make sure that the providers who are currently the licensed daycare homes will be notified of the $11 increase.
Correct, they will be.
Vice Mayor Ballard.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to say, Councilmember Tuttle, if you can hear me, I appreciate all of her work on this, and Gary for yours as well, along with staff. I had no idea before I was on council how big of a deal and lack of child care we have within the city, and so I appreciate all the work that you guys have all done on this.
I appreciate that too. I would tell you, Adrienne Ladd and her staff do a tremendous job with this. I just stand up here and say what they tell me to say, so thank you for that.
And thank you, Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Gary. Item number 11.
Thanks, Mayor. Due to a personal conflict of interest, I'll be abstaining from this item.
Item number 13 regarding housing vouchers.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council.
Good morning, Sally. My questions really are about this family self-sufficiency program. These are positions that currently exist but need to reapply. Can you explain that process and what this program does?
Sure. The Family Self-Sufficiency Program is a program within the Section 8 Housing Choice Voucher Program. And since 1992, HUD has had this Family Self-Sufficiency Program as an option for participants who want to have a caseworker assist with workforce development, education, financial literacy, all in the effort to try and improve people's financial condition and make them self-sufficient. Up until 2022, we had to apply annually for the funding from HUD for those coordinator positions. The funding can only be used to pay their salaries, benefits, and training, and starting in 2022, it is a biannual application. So this is just the request to continue the funding so we can keep those 3 coordinators working with the program.
Sally, this program is voluntary. Can you talk about some of the success rates?
Sure, it is voluntary. The program requires interested participants to sign a 5-year contract and work individually to determine their individual goals. And while under that contract, if there's increases in their earned income, they can actually earn escrow because of that earned income. We currently have 93 households that are participating. HUD says we cannot force any household to participate, so it is entirely voluntary. We have to run the program, though, in order to be considered for additional voucher allocations in the future. And we've had a total of 360 households graduate from the program, and 69 of them becoming homeowners because of it.
And currently, how many folks are in Housing Choice Voucher Program?
Sure, we have 3,100, hold on, the number off the top of my head, 3,144, I believe is the number currently, and over 9,900 on the waiting list for the program.
Do you know from that 3,144 households, how many are part of this program?
93 currently.
93 of the 3,144?
Yes.
And this is simply to reapply for the 3 individuals who are part of that program?
Correct. They are the caseworkers who work day in with the clients participating.
I just wanted to let you highlight this really great program. I know that this is voluntary for the 93 individuals as part of the 3,000 who get this voucher. And I just wanted to say that I really appreciate this program. What it says in our handout really motivated me to pull this item so that you could share the good work. It says to help increase earned income, enhance financial literacy, reduce or eliminate the need for public assistance, and move toward economic independence and self-sufficiency. So I just wanted to really say thank you to the 3 coordinators, and I will very gladly support this item so that you can get further funding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Item number 14.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Assistant Director Gene Zolgaman. Jesse Roma is also at MBAA.
Okay. I have a question. I did email Jesse. He did respond. The concern I have is rate escalation is not at inflation rate. It's only 1.5%, actually slightly below 1.5% a year for 10 years. He did point out that the rate, there was a market analysis done by Martin's company, indicate the rate for this building would be $950 a square foot. We're starting out at $1,073 a square foot. So kind of above that, that's why the reason for the lesser rate increase, less percentage increase, which is fine. Then you have a 27% increase over 10 years, which is slightly less than 3%. But with the time value of money, you're probably right there. Right. I would like to request that staff, if you could please, if something like this comes up that is less than the rate of inflation for increases on rent, if you could please give us the documentation, a justification for that. In this case, it would be the appraisal from the Martin's company.
I want to make one clarification. The appraisal from the Martin's company was done on a facility at 1935 Midfield Road. And so that was a single tenant facility, and they gave us a range based on the length of the lease with the escalation in 1.5. Since this particular facility is actually 3 suites separated by chain link as opposed to individual facilities. That's why we felt like it married with the recommendation from that.
So that's the same building you started out at $950 a square foot?
No, the appraisal done by Martin's was on 1935 Midfield, which is a different facility than this facility.
So was
This
it-
is part of the multi-use cargo building where several of the cargo tenants operate out of the same building. And then this particular suite is shared among the tenants in that suite, just separated by chain link.
Okay. Is it a similar building or not?
No.
Not really?
No,
So
not
there never
really.
was an appraisal done on this building
No,
or any opinion or anything?
no. So,
I think it'd be wise to get that. Good. Especially when we're seeing 0.5% rate increases a year,
Right.
10 years.
right, and like I said, we felt that the market for this probably doesn't go with the rest of the market, just because it is that, it's like having a shared room with others where you don't have your own walls or anything. So we felt like that justified having a little lower escalation since we were able to establish a rate higher than the other facilities in that building.
Okay, Is
separate
it
from
a
the
triple
appraisal.
net lease?
I'm sorry?
Is it a triple net lease?
Because it's a multi-tenant building, the landlord does have responsibility for structural, roof, HVA, that type of thing.
Electricity?
No, they would pay their own electricity.
How do you pay your own electricity with a chain link between the walls?
That suite has its own meter, and then the square footage in each of the chain link areas is allocated based on square foot.
Okay. Okay,
Okay? All right. but
thank you. I would appreciate
Understand your
more
request, and we
information
will
on
do
it
that.
than what we
Yes.
got there, because it just didn't make sense.
Yeah,
So, okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I will note, airport leases are a little more complex because we have FAA requirements regarding equity or among tenants, and our lease rates have to be consistent with schedules that are adopted. So much easier for many of our other real estate transactions, but it gets a little more complex when we start looking at other tenants at the airport and what we're charging. And that's small tenants as well as Textron and others that are out there. So, but we'll provide more information.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. We will, I will move to approve consent agenda item 4B.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. I move to approve consent agenda item number 7.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. I move to approve consent agenda item number 11.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 6-0 with 1 abstention. I move to approve consent agenda item number 13.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. I move to approve consent agenda item number 14.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Board of Bids and Contracts dated October 21st, 2024.
I wasn't sure if I was in the right order for a second. Good morning, Josh Lauber, Department of Finance. The Board of Bids and Contracts convened October 21st for the following items. We have for engineering, the downtown streets two-way conversion, pavement markings and signage for Traffic Control Services Incorporated in the amount of $1,048,360, subject to approval of a new engineer's estimate and budget authorization. We have the water distribution system sanitary sewer to serve Cranor addition for McCullough Excavation Incorporated for an aggregate bid total of $1,485,164. We have the stormwater sewer project number 801 CIPP stormwater sewer repair for Instaform Technologies USA LLC in the amount of $71,874. We have the stormwater sewer number 786 project, stormwater sewer repair for Apex Excavating LLC in the amount of $199,855. And for purchasing, we have the valves, angle ball valves, and brass curb ball valves for the Tap of Kansas Incorporated for an estimated annual usage of $90,100 for a contract term of 1 year with 2 one-year options. We have the roof replacement for the sludge dryer facility at Plant 2 for Farha Roofing LLC in the amount of $95,558.78. We have the furnish and install of new furniture for Westlink Library for Contract Furnishing Rents LLC, DBA Pure Workplace Solutions for an aggregate bid total of $412,120. We have 2 remote surveillance trailers for our real-time information center for WPD for vision detection systems for $77,466.06. We have the employee learning management system software renewal for our human resources for Skillsoft LLC, DBA Skillsoft for an aggregate 3-year total of $67,500. And we have transcription services recommending awarding the city clerk's office the ability to use existing vendor contract 242-00022 with our Wichita Police Department. This is how to become a vendor with the city. These are our open public opportunities out on the street today. And I'd be happy to try to answer your questions, and I recommend your approval.
I have one question. On slide 8, you had the roofing.
Yeah.
Are there certain, there's not very many roofers that bid on that. Are there certain requirements that roofing companies have to meet to be able to bid, or?
Yeah, that's a great question, Councilman Johnston. It really depends on each project. Departments will provide us the specifications. On this one specifically, I don't know of anything uniquely, but I can get you the information of who was notified. We actually have our vendor registrations who can complete the goods and services that we solicit, and we'll notify them. And based upon that, it's just hard telling what the market will do.
Okay, thank you. I was just surprised there's so many roofing companies that why wouldn't more of them bid on it? So
I think part of it is a policy discussion or strategic discussion. We know within purchasing that it can be difficult for vendors to go through a procurement process. Sometimes they may not want to engage in a formal procurement process versus an informal. I think there's different considerations, but I appreciate your question. It's a great question.
okay, thank you.
Josh, I have a follow-up question to just your very topic. The very last slide shows all the open bids that the city currently has. I know you guys moved to a new system. How has that worked out so far?
Thank you. Fantastic. We're actually at the very end stages of migration to our new bonfire system. We're really excited about it because it offers more EDBE opportunities for small subcontractors. It facilitates opportunities to allow a small subcontractor, for example, contract manager at risk Cheney Dam repairs. If a subcontractor did a very specific finite piece and they said, I can do concrete and I'm a registered DBE, they can actually put on the bonfire public procurement portal, I am a DBE registered that can do concrete, and anyone in the public that is viewing that opportunity can see those and engage with those independently of the city. So we're really excited about that. The bonfire network is actually larger because if you have other agencies like Kansas City, Missouri, I think, trying to remember, Kansas City, Missouri on the top of my head uses bonfire. Anyone who registers within the city's bonfire portal is also given the opportunity to use procurement opportunities from other agencies. So it's kind of a compounding effect of amplifying that opportunity. We are seeing larger amounts of interest and larger amounts of vendors being notified through the bonfire system we're really excited about. But overall, our staff are just very grateful for the support and the ability to use this software now. And it's much more easier for our vendors to interact with our systems.
Thank you for that outreach. I know that I was approached by some minority business owners and small business owners that were interested in bidding, but they didn't really understand the process. So can you just, again, one more time, I think it's the slide right before, remind people how they can become?
Sure, great question. So anytime, I have to put it out that if anyone wants to meet or if anyone wants to learn our systems, please contact us at our phone number and email. We're happy to sit down. We have a gentleman who oversees our small business program, our EDBE program, and he's routinely meeting with vendors. I think one of our assistant city managers saw him at a coffee shop with a vendor. He's proactively outreaching and having those conversations with vendors. If you're interested in doing business with this city, go to our website, wichita.gov/purchasing. You'll see our homepage and you'll see our procurement portal embedded in that, where you can submit and view opportunities with the city. We just recently upgraded our website to have what's called an RSS feed. So if you go to wichita.gov purchasing, you'll see at the bottom embedded from our portal without having to click all these public opportunities that we're really excited about. So we're trying to be efficient and effective in how we're demonstrating that marketing opportunity. But again, please contact the purchasing division if you want any help, if you want someone to sit down with you. If it's something where we just explain how to do business, we're more than happy to do that.
Thank you very much, Josh. I see no further questions, so I will move to approve the Board of Bids and Contracts for October 21st, 2024.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Petitions for public improvements.
Good morning, Mayor, City Council members. Paul Gunsman with Public Works and Utilities. For the record, I have a few revised petitions for your consideration this morning. The signatures on the petitions represent 100% of the improvement district, and the petitions are valid per Kansas statute. Brookfield South Edition, located in District 2. On October 11th, 2022, the City Council approved water improvement required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted revised petitions with revised budgets to reflect current market conditions and to cover the costs of the private bid. And I had a typo on this slide. Both of these should be water improvements, one for Phase 6 and one for Phase 7. Brookfield Addition, located in District 2. On October 6, 2020, the City Council approved water and paving improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted revised petitions and revised budgets to reflect current market conditions. And Pineway Addition, located in District 5, on June 4th, 2024, the City Council approved sewer improvements required for a new residential development. The developer has submitted a revised petition with a revised budget to reflect the current market conditions. And with that, it is recommended that the City Council approve the revised petitions and budgets, adopt the amending resolutions, and authorize the necessary signatures. And I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Paul. First question comes from Vice Mayor Ballard.
Thank you, Mayor. Paul, could you go back one slide? Oh, two. Yep, this one. I don't think I've noticed that the adjusted budget so much before. Do you know why?
I had that same question, and I had reached out.
I mean, I'm okay with it. That's just
right. No, it is a lot. The agent for the developer, as well as the developer, had elected to increase the petition because they thought dewatering in order to install the sanitary sewer was going to cost much more than they originally thought. So that's why they increased the petition amount.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mayor. Just checking, Paul. These are all paid with specials, right?
Yes.
Okay, just checking. Thank you.
I see no further questions for staff. Thank you, Paul. I will move to approve the petitions for public improvement.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Approval to exceed the gift limit established by the Ethics Ordinance for Mayor Wu to accept travel and expenses to attend the Rodel Fellowship Seminar in Santa Monica, November 21st through 24th, for the purpose of representing the city. The fellowship is hosted by the nonprofit Rodel Institute for the purpose of education, collaboration, and professional development. The estimated gift amount for travel, hotel, and meals is $3,249.
I will add that there will be no taxpayer dollars spent on this. This was an honor to be selected to be part of the class of 2025 Rodel Fellows. Again, this is a sponsored event by a nonprofit that is a nonpartisan center for leadership and intellectual growth. Rodel helps America's most promising leaders reach their full potential as public servants, deepen their commitment to democracy and the rule of law, and work together to address some of our nation's most important domestic and international challenges. And again, I am honored to represent Wichita and Kansas through the Rodel Fellowship.
Make a motion to approve Mayor Wu's travel as presented.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 6-0 with 1 abstention. Madam Clerk, please call the next item.
Council member appointments and comments.
Are there any appointments by council members?
I have one. I would like to appoint Floyd Ray Bess, also known as Bubba, to the Police and Fire Retirement Board. He's a retired fireman.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. Council member comments. Council member Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I would like to have a council discussion about moving workshops to the chambers. Historically, we've done that in the boardroom, and many in the public feel it's less formal and a little more inviting than coming into the formal chambers for a workshop. And while I respect one person's view, I think that's more of a council decision. During COVID, we chose as a council to move workshops to the chambers because it was safer, but it was a council decision. It wasn't just one of us or city staff. So I'd love to have that conversation as a body. I'm in favor of keeping workshops in the boardroom, personally.
Councilmember Glasscock.
I support the moving council workshops to the chamber. I feel being in here elevates the work that we do to the public. I feel that we take the work more seriously when it's this room opposed to the boardroom. I also believe that from the voting perspective, it's more transparent to the public to have it on a screen. I think the presentations are more comprehensive, and I just feel there's a weight and gravitas of being in this room opposed to something else, especially when we talk about consent agenda items. And if we believe that consent agenda items carry the full weight of any other items on the agenda, and we pull them off, I believe voting in this room matters more. Also has more space for individuals if people want to join, but I'm supportive, and I also believe that the mayor is, she runs the meetings. I think it's her directive of how the meetings are run as well, and so I'm supportive of it being in the chambers.
I'm easy, I can go either way.
I'll just chime in. I think I would like to have more of a discussion if that's possible. I mean, I think there's pros and cons of either way. I appreciate the comments from all of the council members, Councilmember Johnson and Councilmember Glasscock, but I do think that it warrants a discussion and input from the body. Thank you.
We can continue discussing it right here from the bench. Councilmember Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Johnson, could you elaborate a little more on the decisions to bring it into the boardroom? What was the thinking of council at that time?
Into the chambers from COVID, because we were in the boardroom prior to that. The workshop's always been in the boardroom that I know of, even back in like the early 2010s, whatever. When I used to come to meetings, it was always in the boardroom. It was also pretty cool being a member of the public because you were much closer to the city council. They were all sitting in front of you. You can sit in those chairs and you really felt more engaged with the conversation rather than council meetings being out there in the chambers. Now during COVID, because we had to have those barriers up and we wanted to make sure we were not only being good examples to the public, but also being safe, we were in here because we had those dividers. And we chose to come in here, and we didn't have every member up here. We had 2 members down there as well for safety. But right after COVID, we all wanted to get back to the boardroom because of workshops were just different. It's still formal, but not as suit and tie formal. It's not as, I guess, formal as being in the chambers. And a workshop is always council discussion anyway. And even these items that we're going to talk about today, we receive updates from staff. We talk about direction we may want to give staff. And again, public just felt closer in that sense. So for me, I appreciate that tradition. I think there's a lot of benefit to being in the boardroom as opposed to the chambers. There's a difference between our meetings and our workshops. We're not voting during a workshop. The consent meeting right before that historically had only been like 5 to 10 minutes. So workshops in there made sense. Our consent meetings now are a little bit longer, but I still think that the workshop is better off in the boardroom. But again, personal preference.
Appreciate that. Bob, have they always been in the boardroom since you've been here? Okay, yeah. Sitting in the boardroom, people have a easier sight on my bald spot back here, so that's one drawback of the boardroom anyways. Thank you, guys.
As I'll try to summarize a bit of what I'm hearing. I've been going around this community trying to be much more transparent and inviting to people to come to council meetings. And one consideration is people don't really know when council meetings were. So we made council workshops the exact same time as council meetings on the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Tuesdays of the month. So that was one change that happened this year. So now you know that every Tuesday at 9 a.m., there's either a regular council meeting or a workshop meeting. In addition, the second point is we do vote. We vote on a consent agenda, not only on the consent agenda, but a board of bids. We also talk about the improvements. So we do vote. So there is a formality to it, and it is back to transparency. Community members should know that we do vote on these matters, and we now are much more intentional about pulling items so that community knows that we're not just voting on one packet of consent agenda items, but each one has its own weight. And as you saw today, there were multiple items that were pulled that would not have gotten that attention had we not pulled it. So in summary, from my perspective, is this is also taking into consideration staff. And I've had conversations with staff asking, is this easier and much more conducive to communicating with the rest of the public in this forum or in the boardroom? And I was told from communications that this was easier. And again, back to being conducive to helping communicate better. So I made that change yesterday asking staff, but I will gladly continue this conversation As you know, because we have a Open Meetings Act, we have open conversations in these forums so that everyone can understand our thought process. And so I will gladly continue this conversation. Vice Mayor Ballard.
Thank you, Mayor. I think just out of consideration for the other council members, it would have been nice if we just had a heads up, maybe in some of our weekly meetings, that this was something that was of interest to you, just so we didn't get an email saying what the change was prior to us having any type of engagement.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I think 2 points. I've known for a while from COVID that it is easier for comms to run the meeting out here because it is the chambers. It's set up, all the cameras are up there. The boardroom has it as well, and the difference is that there just has to be an additional setup by the building crew. Aside from that, I don't think this room is more transparent than the boardroom because we still talk about what's in the packets. Transparency is the same. The difference is there's just those 2 screens instead of the 1, and then the vote total comes up on the consent meeting, but each of us have pulled consent items from the boardroom. We've discussed them. Staff has presented on those. And if you watch the YouTube feed, people still get to see who's speaking. They still get to hear the questions and information. So I don't think this hurts nor improves transparency. But I do believe the boardroom is more welcoming to people who want to hear our discussion and can sit closer to us and engage with us in that way.
This is Becky, and I just want to chime in. I'm sorry again from being remote, and it's probably a little echoey, but Councilmember Johnson, I was making some notes and you took a lot of my thoughts, so I don't know how you can get my notes even when I'm in Vegas. But I do not think that formality or transparency is compromised in the boardroom. And I've actually had community members say they appreciate it being in the boardroom. As a community member, I presented one time on workshop, and I would have been not as comfortable in chambers as I was in the boardroom. So I appreciate the discussion. I'd like the opportunity for more discussion. Thank you.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you. I'm glad we're having more discussion from the bench about this as well. I pulled up the duties of the mayor as well, section 204030, duties of the officers of the mayor and council. It says that the mayor authority is restricted to that of a council member, except while serving as the chairman of the council meetings. I believe that the mayor should have the ability to make this decision, though I am supportive of it regardless. And in addition, I would like to see workshops, consent agenda items have opportunity for public comment. There are very few opportunities that we all meet as a body and that the public can address us, all 7 at one time. And I believe that we should add to the workshop and consent agenda items on the 4th Tuesday of every month an opportunity for the public to speak in public comment like we do at every other meeting as well.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll pull that ordinance up, but I believe the mayor is only the chair of the meeting during an official meeting, and this decision was made outside of an official meeting. I also would, I disagree with having public comment during the workshop. The workshop is often for council to discuss an item that is coming before us, where we would like to see it go. And when it comes to public interaction, it is the workshop that we tend to say, let's go out for more public comment and ask staff to work on setting up presentations at the various district advisory boards or call for public meetings in that space. At the workshop, I think that should continue to be council discussion amongst us and our team. And then also to go back out to the public, we can give that direction there. Sometimes we receive things in workshops that are not completely done, fully thought out, ideas, directions, and then staff will go do a lot of work to get some of those thoughts complete, and then those will go out for presentation to the public. I think that process should continue as it has been.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Councilman Johnson. I should have probably clarified public comment at the beginning, as we do with the 25 minutes, not about specific agenda items, but public comments at the beginning, as we do with any other meeting. I had 3 board appointments reach out to me about this meeting in particular, that wanted to come speak about animal control issues because that's been in the news, and because this meeting doesn't have the ability for public comment and them to say something from the start, we don't have a meeting on the 5th Tuesday. The next time that they can speak before this body is November 5th. And I feel that is a long period for the public not to address this body, given the opportunity that we are all still meeting here. I don't think adding 30 minutes at the addition to hear public comment is overburdensome for this body. In particular, I think our past 2 meetings, we've had 0 public comment, or maybe 1 person that had signed up in advance. People had maybe engaged prior. So I was talking about prior, not about agenda or workshop items.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I don't have a problem with that. I do think that ultimately would be another council vote, though, to add public agenda to the workshop meeting, but I'm not opposed to that.
I mean, I would agree that that would require an ordinance change to the order of business.
Because it's an ordinance change, can we do it from from council member comment items right now? Or does this need to come before November 5th?
We would need to be directed to pursue and draft a change as you would direct. It could be brought back at a council meeting for discussion on new business.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor. I actually don't see the individuals that have reached out to me in this meeting, though I thought they were going to attend. However, because we can change the agenda as presented because we haven't adjourned, could I make the motion that we open up to public comment before we adjourn to see if there's anybody from the public that wants to address the body?
Am I allowed to do that procedurally?
Well, it's not provided for by ordinance. It's your meeting and you can make that decision. I don't believe it's prohibited.
So I make the motion to add to the agenda a period of public comment not to exceed 30 minutes as a reflection of what we do normally during meetings.
We have a motion. Can we do that? Motion and a second. I'll second it. But there's discussion now. Councilmember Johnson.
My comments are not to the motion.
Vice Mayor Ballard.
So is this just for today or?
Just for today, and then
And
we
then
can vote
we'll
on an
do
ordinance
okay.
later. Yeah.
Sure. Okay, great. Thanks.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none.
I'm sorry, could Councilmember Dalton, Councilmember Glasscock, I'm sorry, could you please repeat the motion?
I'm also good with Councilman Dalton. That's fine. The motion is to add a period of public comment to today's agenda, not to exceed the 30 minutes as we typically do on normal meeting days.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Yay.
Motion passes 7-0. Before we close out council member comment and begin public comment, are there any further items from the council? Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to read something that was posted online about the move. This person says it's weird to see the workshop in the chambers. This is separate business than general council meetings. Also, they said this feels weirdly authoritarian. The boardroom makes it an equal playing ground and allows the public to see local government in action.
Councilmember Glasscock.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm very glad for this discussion. I think we should do more of this from the body. So I'm thankful for that. Just to counter, I think that those arguments are, we pulled consent agenda items off today, and so that is the work of this body. And so if we have the intention to continue to hear consent agenda items at workshop, then we should have the opportunity to engage from this bench because it's the official work of the body. If not, let's just do a workshop and vote on consent agenda items and postpone it a week later. That would be my change. If we have a workshop, let's have a workshop separately, but let's not add a consent agenda items because that should be and is the work of this body in official government capacity from the bench.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. That's difficult because sometimes there are things that would require action on that week, and that was kind of what the consent agenda piece was for. Going forward, because we're just having discussion, and I don't know procedurally what that would look like. I think because there's disagreement on where we are, I would love to see a future item for the council to vote where to go, whether it's in the chambers or in the boardroom. And then we can be on the record, and the majority of the council can say either way.
I'm in favor of that. I will direct staff to create a new business item for the November 5th meeting so that we can vote on whether to have workshops in the chamber or in the boardroom. I think it's just a direction for staff, is that right? So I see no further discussion. I will add one item that is not related to this. I just want, for the record, Public Works Director Gary Jansen sent me an email, a follow-up to a question I asked last week regarding air quality, and any opportunity that I have to highlight what staff has sent to us, I will, because again, that is back to transparency. We ask questions and staff does respond, and so I want it to be on record. The question was asked regarding a violation to the air quality and what type of penalties the city could face if we violated that. And in this response, which came from the Senior Environmental Specialist for the City of Wichita, it says, a few years ago, a very loose estimation of the cost of non-attainment was done. According to Don, this estimation showed about a cost of $10 million per year over the 20 to 30 year period in accordance with the plan the EPA would put on us to get back into attainment. More recently, Oklahoma City has done an estimation of what this would cost their region since the Oklahoma City Metro is facing non-attainment. Quote, a recent study shows that a violation of federal air quality standards and ensuing federal regulatory requirements could cost the Oklahoma City-Shawnee combined statistical area as much as $9.6 million to $15.2 billion over a 20 to 30 year period. So again, this was a response to a question we as a body asked if we did not reach attainment. And again, this was a consent agenda item from last week, and I appreciate that staff responded and provided that feedback. Any further comments from council members? I see none. I will now ask for public comment. Would anyone from the public like to address the council?
Good morning, Twyla Purity. I live in District 1 Polo Club. I've attended both city council meetings and workshops. The vibe in the boardroom is a little less formal. You guys seem to chat more, or it's a little lighter, but as an attendee, I'll tell you the boardroom can be crowded. The chairs aren't comfortable at all. I attended, there was a workshop, and I think you were talking about pickleball. It was quite crowded, and when your back's to everybody, you couldn't see the enthusiasm for people in the audience. So there's something I think to be said. You guys are very, you're observant, and you see facial comments or facial expressions and can interpret those. So you're missing that. And I don't agree when somebody says that to see local government in action, it's better in the boardroom, because we just see the backs of your heads. We don't see your expressions. It just doesn't feel welcoming or engaging. I understand that this is the exception. I'm not able to usually comment at workshops, but you just can't see what's going on or what people are thinking. So I just wanted to share that as somebody who attends both. The other thing too, like in here, and I don't know because it's a workshop, but we're not able to see the votes today And usually, we can see that, the time, well, I can understand, I guess, why there's no timer. I won't take advantage because there's not a timer. But as somebody who attends both, I just wanted to let you know. Thanks.
Anyone else from the public who would like to comment?
Matthew Broderick. I just am happy that you guys found this opportunity to have public comment for today. I'm here with the Arts Council. I came to support public art, and I saw that there was some notes in the minutes about the last 10 years of public art funding, and I saw on the list just so many incredibly cool, so incredibly fun, just the kind of things that enrich our community, things that are vital for the future of our community to continue to keep young folks coming here and wanting to work and live here. I hope that you guys get all of the information that you need from today's workshop with the public art overview. I'll point out that I noticed on the consent agenda the item for Lily's funding for the trip to California. I think it's great that she'll have the opportunity to go there. I guess, would have liked to have seen more digging into that item as far as like, well, where did this gift come from? And how did she get these funds? And all of those types of things. I think if we're talking transparency and we're gonna make an exception to a gift thing, I think some of the citizens might want to know, like, where did this gift come from? If it was just the Institute and they give it to all of the public people that they invite, I think that would have been great. But otherwise, I love the fact that you're going to allow public comment, if you do continue to allow public comment in these meetings, because I think Dalton made a great point that there could be an event that's important that you might not then get those for 3 weeks. And it's great to have the opportunity to speak to this body and support the things that we're passionate about. And for me, that's the arts. Thanks for your time.
Would anyone else from the public like to address the council?
I just want to piggyback on what Twyla said. I can hear way better in here than I can in there. I like the intimacy of the room, but the sound is much better in here, and I'm a little challenged in that department. So I hear you all, I hear all of you really well in here. Sometimes the speaker is too far away from and I also like seeing the head shakes and the eye rolls and stuff like that. So it adds to the meeting. So anyway, thank you.
Anyone else from the public who would like to address the council? I see none. I appreciate the 3 individuals who spoke before us. It looks like there is some favor for the public comment piece, so I don't know if it's a direction for staff also.
I think there needs to be a motion to direct staff to prepare an ordinance to change as you wish.
And if you'd like, Mayor, we can roll that in with the discussion that you've already directed us to bring back.
I would like that. Do I have any in favor? Okay, I see a motion by Councilmember Glasscock.
Do we need the motion, or?
Probably would be safe to give us direction, so we'd bring something back.
So I make the motion, and I guess this would be the question for Jennifer too. So when we meet today, it's still a regular council meeting until we break for workshop, correct?
Well, yes and no. There is a special ordinance that talks about the order of business for workshop meetings. So
okay, so I would motion that in the special workshop ordinance, we add public comment to the beginning to reflect what we do during regular business meetings.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yeah, this is Councilmember Tuttle. We're, if I'm understanding this right, we are adding 1 or 2 more ordinances to the city. Is that correct?
My motion is to amend the current ordinance, not add a new ordinance.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Jennifer, did I say everything that I needed to in that motion?
Yes, you did. I mean, it's to direct staff to bring back the ordinance.
Okay.
And I think the record also reflects the intent to have staff bring back a change to the location.
I would also like to amend that motion. I think you just saw, this is the first time ever the council member agenda shows greater transparency regarding travel by council members and mayor. And I want that to also be reflected in an ordinance or reflected in, I guess, on the record, that this shows, number one, greater transparency, showing who is paying for the travel. And if taxpayers will be paying for the travel, I think it should also be mentioned. I'm not getting a check for $3,249. This is the organization, the nonprofit, paying for my travel, my hotel, and the meals while I'm there. I'm not getting a check for this. In addition to, I think this is moving forward. All travel will have this type of verbiage so that it is clear for community on whom is paying for the travel. And again, for my travel regarding the Rodel Institute seminar, there are no taxpayer dollars. So can there be an amendment to also how council member agenda travel is noted?
Mayor, we can draft an ordinance if that's the direction you'd like this codified in an ordinance. That motion should be reflective of that information. That's the direction we can draft that ordinance.
Vice Mayor Ballard.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, so how is that different than what we're doing right now? Because I asked, a couple weeks ago when we started discussing this, that I thought it would be great if we could include this. I think the majority, or if everybody agreed. So do we need an ordinance, or is this just the direction that we would like for staff to include this for the public? I don't want it to make it too complicated. I think what was presented today is great. And if any, whoever's traveling, if they wanted to add additional information, that's great. I just don't want to make too much more work for staff, because I think it addresses what my concerns were.
Yeah, Vice Mayor, I think that's a good question. We are able to do this under staff direction. I think the mayor's motion would codify it, so it's just a question of policy. Do you want it just directed by staff, or do you want it codified by ordinance?
I would like to codify it by ordinance, but I will gladly take any other comments from council members. Councilmember Johnson.
Thanks, Mayor. Just a procedure piece here. There was a motion and a second for one item, and then you brought up a potential amendment. I did not hear friendly amendment, and I did not hear that accepted. So are we voting on the initial amendment by Councilmember Glasscock and then yours? Or is that a friendly amendment and Councilmember Glasscock accepts?
I would not accept, not because I don't support the motion, but I think it's very different in terms of travel versus public agenda. And so probably I would like two separate approvals.
Okay, so we are back on Councilmember Glasscock's motion.
Correct.
Okay.
We'll start with that motion. And did it get a second? We have a motion and a second regarding adding public comment to workshops. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. I motion to ask staff to codify the language regarding travel by council members and mayor.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. Thank you for the robust conversations. And now I will motion to adjourn officially this meeting.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further discussion? I see none. Madam Clerk, please open the roll.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0. We will now turn it over to City Manager Bob Layton for the workshop, which will have no official binding action.
Thank you, Mayor. We've got 3 items for you today. 2 of them are related, and they discuss future plans for our water delivery system, our treatment and delivery system. The first one is a discussion about the future of the existing water plant. And so I'd like staff to present the work that has been done to this point, assessing the condition and the options for that plant, and recommendations from not just staff, but a working advisory board as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Gary Jansen.
Good morning, Mayor, council members. I'm just going to be very brief here and introduce this, and the manager gave you a head start. So, you know, as we move towards bringing our new water treatment plant online sometime next spring, there's going to be a period of time where we'll be operating both plants, but it's likely by early 2026 we'll be bringing our current water treatment plant offline. And so we spent the last 12 months or more evaluating options for what to do next with that facility. Laura Quick, our utilities optimization manager and expert in a lot of other areas, has led this effort for us. And so I'm going to turn it over to her and let her walk you through the options that we've looked at. We focused on, it really started to move towards wanting to use this facility in an emergency situation. So you'll see that most of the options she's going to discuss with you, and we discussed with the steering committee, kind of look to that. But we also looked at other options too, what future growth might look like and some of those needs. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm Laura Quick with the City of Wichita Public Works and Utilities Optimization Program. So just a brief agenda for today. I'm going to be going over each of these things with you: a purpose, a history, brief summary of our current water demands, some example condition assessment findings that we have found, alternatives that we've looked at, and high-level cost estimates associated with those. I have a steering committee and staff recommendation to go over with you, and then we'll talk about some next steps. So to give you some context for why we're here today, as Gary mentioned, the new Wichita Water Works project is nearing completion and should be coming online in April of 2025. From that point, both plants are expected to operate simultaneously for about 8 to 12 months. We don't want to take the current plant offline until we've put the new plant through its paces, given it a chance to operate in all seasons, high demand, low demand, things like that. So we do need to start talking about what are we going to do with the current water treatment plant, or you'll often heard it referred to as main water treatment plant, MWTP. We're gonna have to stop calling it that at some point, but these are the questions that we are trying to answer. What function will it serve? What budget do we need for it to serve that function, and what staff resources are we going to need? So really today, this falls into the category of things that you guys mentioned earlier, where we don't have a specific item we're ready to bring you yet. We're not ready for a decision. This today is about, are we on the right path, or is there a different path that you'd like us to explore? So earlier this year, we contracted with Burns & McDonnell to develop options and high-level cost estimates, and this presentation today is the result of that work. A brief history of the current water treatment plant. The initial part of the plant was constructed in 1939, so we're now 85 years old for the oldest parts of the plant. It was expanded in 1953. 1992, we had a partial rehab. And then skip forward to 2011 through 2016. The plant's now around, at that time, was around 75 years old. Age was starting to become apparent. It was clear that trying to maintain it was becoming more costly, so we started looking at options for rehabilitating the current plant or replacing it with a new one. Back in 2016 is when we ultimately decided to construct the new Wichita Water Works plant. after determining that rehab wouldn't be enough to reduce the overall risk associated with continuing to rely on the old water plant as our water source for around 500,000 people. So 2017 to present has taken us through design, construction, expected now to complete in April of 2025, and as Gary mentioned, should be taking the current plant offline probably around 2026. So we wanted to know how much water do we need and how long will the capacity at our new plant be enough. So we looked at some historical trends. We looked at trends in both the daily average water use as well as the highest single day for any given year. What you see on this chart, I know it's kind of hard to read, but the break in the middle is 2024, so that's present. So everything to the left of that would be our historical actual usage. Everything to the right would be our future projections. The bottom line reflects our average consumption. The top line reflects our single highest day for any given year. So then to project that out into the next 20 years, this chart goes all the way out to 2045. We've made some trend lines based on past data. The trend lines show on this chart are based on our most recent year, so 2023 as a starting point. Using 2023 as a starting point, the highest we would expect to see in 2045 for a single highest day would be 86 MGD, million gallons per day. We also looked at this another way and used the 20-year rolling average as a starting point. That's not shown on this chart, but that would get us up to a 96 MGD expectation in 2045. So the takeaway from this, current and projected demands do not indicate a need for more than 120 MGD, which is what the new plant can provide. And I have some examples to show you, some condition assessments that we did. And keep in mind, a lot of our assets at the current water treatment plant can't be seen. They're underground or submerged, at least they're difficult to show in a picture. So the pictures I have here for you. The first one on the far left is a flocculation basin. You can see a paddle wheel showing signs of corrosion. There's a concrete walkway showing some concrete deterioration. Picture in the middle is a secondary sedimentation basin showing a chain scraper system that's corroding. And then the picture on the right is a lime residual transfer pump showing delaminated paint and corrosion. So just some examples of the kinds of things you'll see at the current water treatment plant. Conclusions from our condition assessment: the plant is functional thanks to the routine maintenance that our staff does on a daily basis, but there's also quite a bit of deferred maintenance that would need to be addressed. Examples there: concrete condition, valves, piping, and the roof. Another point, I didn't have a picture to show of this, but our disinfection chemical storage facilities don't meet current regulations. We're not currently in violation for that because they were constructed according to code at the time, but they wouldn't meet construction codes for safety today. They're aging, they pose a risk to our employees, and so the responsible thing to do once we take the plant offline is to rectify that. Third conclusion, different parts of the plant will need to be rehabilitated to be and maintained depending on which raw water source we use if we are going to continue to use the plant in some function. So in other words, it's not a complete throwaway at this point. There's still some beneficial use we could get from it, but we would need to put some effort into that.
Laura, may I please ask you to speak closer to the microphone for our online audience?
Sure. All right, so we looked at, this says we looked at 7 options. We actually looked at a total of 8, but we rejected one pretty early on. I'll come back to that in a minute. But the things that we looked at between all of the different options, we were specifically paying attention to how or if the plant would be used for each option. Most of our options focus on using it only as an emergency backup. We have some variation in what source water we're using. The treatment capacity, startup time is a very important consideration for us. So if we are going to use this for an emergency use, how long would it take to bring it back online? And then we also vary in, the options vary in finished water quality. And of course, they vary in cost. So the costs that we're looking at include construction and ongoing maintenance. For those emergency use options, it's going to include a cost to keep it in standby mode, but it's not necessarily going to include the cost of operating the plant in the event of an emergency. The nature of the emergency is going to determine the cost of actually operating it in those situations. Is it a 1 week, a 1 month, a 1 year kind of a thing? And the differences in operational costs is not going to vary too much from one option to the other, with one exception that I'll get into on a future slide. So this is a summary of all of our options. I did bring this slide printed out. I wasn't sure if you guys would have it in front of you or not, but I'm going to go ahead and pass it. So what you are passing around is the exact same thing that the public can see on the screen right now, and I'm also going to come back to this a little bit later. But I do have a slide for all but one of these options, and so I'm going to move forward with those. The slide that I don't have or the option that I don't have a slide for is actually option number 8, adding capacity, and that's because we stopped digging into that one pretty early on after realizing there wasn't a driving need to add capacity at this point. And I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert as well. The committee and staff recommendations are in order of preference, number 5 and number 4. So when we get to those options, I'll dig in just a little bit more deeply on those. So the first thing we looked at was a complete site demolition. How much would it cost to remove everything on site? And this is a 15-acre site. Keep in mind, a lot of the assets are buried or submerged. Most of what's there you can't actually see. There's quite a bit underground. So could we prepare this site to be used for some other purpose? Analysis on that would take about a year to complete that at a capital cost between $50 and $75 million. The graphic here, I realize it's kind of difficult to see, but everything shown in red, those are pipeline assets that would need to be preserved for, we're going to continue using those. So the on-site, there are still some assets that would need to be in place.
If we can go back there real quick. What are the challenges? That's quite a steep cost right there, 50 to 75 million. What are the extenuating circumstances that drive up that cost?
I don't have the specifics on how that cost was arrived at, but like I mentioned, it's because so much of what's there is underground. There's just that much to remove, and when we're talking about demolishing, scraping the site, getting everything out of there, deconstructing everything that's there, it added up quickly, but I don't have more details than that. I can get that for you.
Okay, and we have to remove everything underground?
I would assume so if we're going to use it for some other purpose. The idea with this particular option was, does it hold any value for us to remove everything that's there and potentially use it for something completely unrelated, or for a private developer or something like that? So the idea with this one was to remove everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Did a contractor come up with that price, or?
That was our consultant, Burns McDonnell.
Consultant? I know when they built the Biomed Center, they found some underground. They had to go down quite a ways to remove it and infill it with sand. I doubt if it was $50 to $75 million to do that.
Okay.
I'd like more information on that.
Sure.
And this is my least favorite option out of reviewing the options prior, but I mean, even just the land is not even remotely. So you have a $50 to $70 million capital investment to be able to remove it. There's zero chance we get any return on that, even just selling the land. I mean, have we evaluated what the return would be? I mean, negligible, if anything. Okay, thank you.
Yes, we can do a little bit more work on that area. All right, so the second option we looked at was mothballing it and making it safe. And basically, we would be taking it offline indefinitely, including dismantling the chemical storage equipment that I mentioned earlier. That's the make safe part. We would not do any rehabilitation unless there's a future demand to bring it back online. Startup time, if we were to decide to bring it back online, would be a year plus. We'd be looking at making the design and usage decisions at that point. So essentially, this is deferring any of those decisions until sometime in the future. There would be no provisions made at this time for disinfection or corrosion control. We'd just be leaving everything as is. We would have an ongoing need to do some minimal maintenance just to preserve what we have there so that it could continue to be used in the future if needed. The estimate there was that would take 2 full-time employees, and that's doing some basic maintenance such as filter backwashing, operating the feed systems, exercising the gates, valves, pumps, and blowers at least monthly, and keeping the electronic control systems up to date. So there's no capital cost associated with mothballing the plant until it is returned to service. The 20-year life cycle cost, and this accounts for Wichita Water Works is not functioning. We're going to redirect water to the main water treatment plant. These are not options that could add capacity. This is using the same source water going to one plant or the other. Triggers for these emergency use options could be a catastrophic compromise at the new plant, such as a tornado, fire, or flood, or it could be some sort of planned outage that takes out multiple treatment trains, for example. So we have a high degree of redundancy at our new water treatment plant, but if we did need to take multiple assets out of service at the same time, this could potentially be a measure to mitigate that.
Can I ask real quick, do we have any examples of something like that happen, some catastrophe at a water treatment plant that just takes it offline for a prolonged period of time?
Yeah, actually, our city manager would be familiar with the flood in 1993 in Des Moines. That was one that did take their water plant offline. The community there lost their running water for 11 days. You can maybe imagine the fire danger, the disruption to schools, hospitals, the entire community. So besides not having water for 11 days, it was actually another 8 days before the water plant was producing safe water. So almost 3 weeks from a flood, which is probably one of the more possible scenarios for our community.
When was the last time Wichita flooded?
I cannot answer that.
It's a long time.
That's just one issue. That plant was subject, it was close to the river, subject to that kind of hazard. I think it's other opportunities for wiping out the plant, a tornado or some other significant disaster. I don't think you would say flooding would necessarily, jeopardize our plant because of the big ditch and the work that's gone into it in that regard. As a result of their plant going down, they have 2 plants. They have built a second plant for redundancy.
Well, there's the human tragedy of 11 days without water, longer than that. So there's a human tragedy. I imagine there's the financial cost of the city as well. You may not have that information now, and I can look that up myself later, but was there a capital cost as well that cost the city in terms of loss? You might know more.
I don't remember the capital cost. Des Moines is very similar to Wichita in that it's the regional provider of water, so most of the suburban communities were also dry. What would be interesting is the cost to the economy.
Yes.
Because, again, Des Moines is not as reliant on manufacturing as Wichita, and loss of water would basically shut down manufacturing operations for an extended period of time here, which has, as we know, has a very significant cost to the private sector and to our economy.
I would just be, and I don't want it to be a heavy lift because I think we need the redundancy too, but if there's an economic cost of what 1 day without a plant would look like, or 10 days without a plant would look like in case of a tragedy or in case of something, I think that would offer more justification for an emergency use aspect to be able to bring it online too. Obviously, there's the human part, but there's also the economic question of what does water not look like in a community for 11 days.
Sure.
I actually would like a follow-up question to that. I want to know what the new water treatment plant and all the redundancies that are already in place for this new water treatment plant so that we don't have to have another redundancy to the redundancy.
Laura can maybe talk about that. The redundancies are system redundancies. So if a piece of the plant goes down, you have a backup system for that. And we spent a lot of time talking about that in the design and final approval of the plant. But we never represented that a catastrophic event that would take down the plant, that could be covered under the redundancy. So it's really two different scenarios that we're talking about. And we could obviously give you more information regarding how the redundancies are built into the existing system. But as Laura's listed, there's always that potential for a tornado, I guess, or something to that effect. And since we have a plant now, the question was how to go forward. And I think it's a very legitimate policy discussion to have, because it's how much risk are you willing to tolerate going forward. And we had this, I think I may have mentioned when we were doing initial planning for the plant, we had some private sector representatives that helped us think through all of this. They were a little more tolerant in terms of risk than our elected officials at the time. And I think that was reinforced when we lost main transmission line, and we lost water supply here, and the way our residents responded and the concerns they had about losing their source of water for, how many days were we down? Do you remember? 3 days, yeah. So you have to judge what the public would tolerate and what our economy would tolerate in terms of the amount of risk you're willing to take. And that's judging demolition all the way through these other options we have. And so it's a cost benefit review. And some of that is more at a policy level than it is a business.
Have we evaluated the effect of it? F3 tornado, F4 tornado? Because those walls are huge.
Yes. Right.
Obviously, the administration building would be gone.
Right.
But huge tanks, it'd be tough for a tornado to move those.
Sorry, I might jump in real quick. I don't know that so there's two buildings on site at the new water treatment plant that are generally tornado proof. That's the generator building, the operations building, but there's nothing out there, just like any other building in this town, that's going to be completely tornado proof. There's so many scenarios of where it happens, when it happens, regardless of the size of it. I think it's prudent to consider that it could take out any part of the facility, even with the redundant systems in place, that would take down all operations of the plant. So from our opinion, the risk is real. I think the manager said it really well. This is probably going to be really a challenge to look at this as a cost benefit from the economic standpoint. There's just so many different scenarios. But I don't think anything is foolproof or tornado proof, even with those two buildings that were built that way. You see across America what happens at different times, and entire communities are wiped out. That's what we're trying to plan for.
So you have a sense now of how difficult this decision-making process is, and we've been asking a lot of these questions ourselves too, and there are two different ways to look at it. I mean, we've never experienced an emergency of this magnitude for a water treatment system that lasted for weeks or months, but that doesn't necessarily mean it never will. So it's really a question of how much risk do you want to take on. We have an opportunity to mitigate some of that risk of a catastrophe with this current water treatment plant. It doesn't have to be used in that way, but it does hold some value for mitigating a potential risk. So on to our option 3, which is our first emergency use scenario. And this would have been the cheapest thing to do if we just said, let's just keep the plant there, but not worry about treating any water. We just use it to be able to introduce raw, untreated water into the distribution system. If we had a catastrophe, at least we could fight fires. At least we could provide running water, even if it wasn't potable at that point. This would potentially give us up to 50 million gallons per day. It would take a day or two to start up, but ultimately that concept was rejected by KDHE because of the risk associated with putting untreated water into the distribution system.
Does that mean we're not allowed to, by KDHE, pursue this option, or?
Basically, although we did not push back hard at this point, after hearing their concerns about it, we moved on to something we thought would be more palatable, but they did not say we absolutely could not. They didn't like the idea.
So this one would be going back and forth with them if we pursue this option?
we could do that. We could push back and try to pursue this.
I might add one more comment. Sorry to butt in. So just to provide a little bit more levity to this, we're talking about the idea of putting contaminated water, if you will, into this. We're going to contaminate the entire system. And so there's no way of knowing the length of time it would take to disinfect the entire system to bring it back online. We could be out of a water system for months and months, if not longer, if we introduce water like this into our system. I don't think we want to push back. You'll see again when we look at the options from a cost perspective, it's not all bad. I think it makes sense that they said no to this, and I think we should agree with it myself.
So this is a still emergency situation here.
Still an emergency situation, but it creates such a longer lasting effect on our overall system and what it does for moving forward.
I think Flint, Michigan showed us the impact of changing the type of water that you put into a system and the unintended consequences, because there are certain things we do to minimize the leaching of lead and other chemicals into the water, and you lose all of that by putting untreated water in as well. I mean, there's just a lot of consequences. This is not a good option.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the information anyways. Thank you.
All right, so option number 4, this is again for emergency use only. Under this scenario, we would be treating groundwater only. We would be disinfecting it, so it would not go through a water softening process. One positive to this scenario, we would only need to preserve the portions of the current plant that are required for groundwater disinfection. We would no longer treat surface water at this plant, so that takes care of a lot of the assets. Capital costs associated with this include constructing 2 new cross-connect pipelines, rehabilitating a 66-inch flow control valve, demolishing the east primary settling basin, and that is to make room for construction of a new disinfection building. Under this scenario, we'd have a capacity of 45 MGD, and I probably should have mentioned a little bit more detail about where that comes from. So 45 MGD is what we used, is what we felt was an acceptable minimum capacity for an emergency use situation. And so all of these options are, you're going to see 45 MGD for the capacity. Startup time after construction for this option would be 1 to 2 days. The construction itself would take a couple of years, but then after it's finished, it would be maintained in a standby mode and could be brought back online in a day or 2. The water quality from this option would be compliant, meaning it's safe, it is disinfected, but it's hard water. It's not the soft water we're used to today. So we're trying to minimize costs with water quality outcomes. Ongoing labor needs, this is going to require 1 full-time employee to maintain those portions of the plant that have to be maintained in a standby mode, so the plant could be brought back online. Total capital cost in the range of $24 to $29 million. 20-year life cycle cost, $28 to $33 million. And again, so option 4 is the second choice recommendation of the committee. Option 5 is the staff and steering committee's first choice on what we think would be the best use of funds in this situation. It's exactly the same as option 4 in that we are using groundwater only. The source water is disinfected. Like option 4, it's still producing hard water. The difference here is that we are not constructing a new disinfection building. And the idea here is that we don't know if we're ever going to put this plant back into service. We don't necessarily have to spend money constructing a new disinfection building. We could wait for an emergency to arise and then bring in tanker trucks of chlorine and ammonia for disinfection. So we'd be setting up a temporary disinfection system. We would still get safe water. We would save about $13 million from the construction cost of the disinfection building. However, the flip side of that is that those cost savings are negated if this is a long-term emergency. So using the temporary chemical feed system is a higher cost if it drags out longer than 6 to 12 months. So now we're adding in another variable about what kind of emergency is it and how likely is it that it would be something that would last longer than 6 to 12 months.
I do have a quick question.
Yeah.
Regarding, so the capital cost, obviously the initial investment, the 20-year life cycle, so we're looking at 15 to 20 million. So we're talking about $1 million a year to maintain that.
3 to 4 million. Yeah, going from the lower end to the upper end of those ranges, it's 3 to 4 million to maintain, and that's based on the one full-time employee, labor, chemicals, and electricity costs added together over a 20-year life cycle.
I may be reading this wrong. It's a 20-year life cycle, and it says it's 15 to 20 million to maintain. So it's to operate it for.
No, I'm sorry. That includes the capital cost.
Oh, that's inclusive
Yes.
of the capital. The 20-year life cycle is inclusive of the capital cost for all of these.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. So capital cost is included in that 20-year life cycle cost. So we'd be looking at 11 to 16 million for the upfront capital cost, and then an additional 3 to 4 million for the maintenance needs and to
Over the
maintain
course
it
of
in
20 years.
over the course of 20 years.
Okay.
To keep it in a standby mode.
Thank you for that.
Yes.
And the life cycle costs, those are paid for by our water rates.
Yes, and I have a slide later on the budget we currently have available. But we already have an item set aside in our CIP and in our pro forma for this purpose. So this would not be, depending on the option that we go with, it may not be a new add. If we want one of those higher cost options, we would have to find funds to put with what we have now. So this is on a future slide, but just so you know, looking at the table, we have $27 million budgeted in the CIP for the future of the main water treatment plant, and ongoing life cycle costs, we have $300,000 per year right now, which would be enough for this option.
Okay, yep, I'll be looking out for that slide. Thank you.
All right, option 6, this would be using the current plant much like we use it today. We would be treating a blend of source waters, just like we do today, groundwater and surface water both. That's a different treatment process. We still get a capacity of 45 MGD because, again, we're rerouting water, redirecting water away from the new plant to this plant in this scenario. Startup time would be about 1 week. Again, this is after construction. Construction takes longer, but the startup time for this would be about 1 week. And that's because the treatment process takes time to establish the right conditions for this particular water treatment method. The treatment process requires a polymer and some other chemicals to build up in concentration before the treatment process will work. So the finished water quality on this option is compliant, safe, it's been disinfected, and it's also soft like what we have today. So this would produce a water very similar to what we're used to having today. Labor needs for this option, 2 full-time employees per year, and that is because we are maintaining more assets than the previous option. We're maintaining what we need for both groundwater and surface treatment. Capital cost for this one, $14 to $19 million. 20-year life cycle cost, including that capital cost, would be $22 to $28 million. With this option, we are constructing a new disinfection building again, so putting that back on the table. Option 7, same thing as option 6, but now we're taking that disinfection building away and going back to using a temporary disinfection system, bringing in tanker trucks on a temporary basis. Startup for this one is again about a week. And while this is the cheapest option, staff and the steering committee felt that the longer startup time makes this on both 6 and 7 much less desirable, because at this point, if we are in an emergency situation where we find ourselves with no running water at all, a week is a long time to wait. Capital cost for this item is very minimal. We could actually, we think, absorb that within our operating budget. 20-year life cycle cost is the cost of the 2 full-time employees, chemicals, and energy to maintain. So $8 to $9 million life cycle cost for this one. Budget considerations. So there are a few unknowns that we haven't accounted for in this that may or may not impact the final number down the road. Pending lead and copper rule changes by the EPA is one of those. They actually published a new rule within the last week or 2, but we don't yet know how KDHE is going to apply that to our situation. So in the lead and copper rule, there's a requirement for corrosion control, orthophosphate feeds, Our new water plant already meets that. We knew what this requirement was going to be. Our new water treatment plant is fine. The main water treatment plant, the current water treatment plant meets the legacy regulations. We don't know if KDHE would require us to upgrade it if we were going to keep it in service. So that could potentially add a cost for an additional chemical feed system that we would need. Also keep in mind, again, that the life cycle costs that I've presented you with do not include emergency operation. So this includes construction to prepare the plant and then ongoing maintenance to hold it in a standby mode. It does not include the cost of an actual emergency.
Do we have any belief or any information that the EPA could be making these changes anytime soon? Like, is there a certain date that they would make this by?
We should know fairly soon. It's like I say, they've already published the rule. Now we need to find out how KDHE is going to interpret it for us. So that's a question we're going to be asking them before we move into our next phase.
Okay, thank you.
As I mentioned, we have $27 million currently budgeted in our CIP for this purpose. We also have programmed $300,000 per year into our pro forma for ongoing upkeep. And this is the same table I handed out, same table I put up earlier, just to recap and have the summary all in one place. Remember, we don't have a slide for option 8 because we did not dig into that one after deciding there was not enough drivers to add capacity at this point. So our staff and our committee recommendations, again, are options 5 and option 4. And I'll explain why here in a minute. Some additional points to consider. A lot of the components at the main water treatment plant are at the end of their service life, but they could be rehabilitated to serve some beneficial purpose. The new water plant provides a high degree of redundancy, but is still a single point of failure in the event of a catastrophe. Adding capacity does not appear to be warranted at this time. And like we talked about earlier, we are trying to balance the cost and benefit of how to use this plant against an unknown risk and what's a reasonable startup time. So putting all of those ideas together is exactly what we are trying to do. And that brings me to our recommendations. So both staff and the steering committee came up with our first recommendation being option 5, and that is to use the plant for emergency use only. We would be treating groundwater only, no longer capable of treating surface water at that point. Option 5 had the temporary disinfection setup option to save upfront capital costs. That option is the lowest cost with the shortest startup time, was the primary driver for selecting that one first. The alternate recommendation that came out of the steering committee was option 4, again, using it for emergency use only, groundwater treatment only, with the new disinfection building. That would make it more readily available for a long-term emergency. This option had the second lowest cost with a short startup time. And it was the most economical option for emergencies lasting longer than 6 to 12 months. So today we're presenting these options to you. Like we've covered earlier, we're not asking for a formal decision today, but for your feedback. If you think we are moving in the right direction, our next steps are going to be to start talking about what's the optimal design and construction delivery model for option 5, unless we get feedback from you to move in a different direction. After we figure out construction and delivery model, we would be coming back to council for approval of a formal concept and project delivery method. After that point, we'd be issuing an RFP for design and engineers' cost estimates. And then construction would begin after the main water treatment plant comes offline, probably in 2026. So we're not in any rush to make a decision. We can take our time with this if we need to. Looking for any feedback you guys have, any additional questions you would like us to answer before we start moving into our next steps as staff.
Can I ask a question regarding option number 7, which is a blend required? So that is how our current treatment plant is working. Can you talk about the blend that is currently used between surface and groundwater versus the new water treatment, surface and groundwater?
a little bit, and I'll have Gary probably fill in the parts that I can't. Historically, we've used approximately a 50-50 blend at the current water treatment plant. And the current treatment plant, the old plant, requires a blend. It is not capable of a treatment that treats complete groundwater or full surface water. So we have to have a blend there at the current water treatment plant. The new water treatment plant will be capable of operating on all surface water, all groundwater, or a blend. There are pros and cons to more groundwater, more surface water. It does take a different mix of chemicals and treatment methods. As far as the current blend, I don't know if anybody is able to speak to that.
Laura, you did good with that. We probably are actually more at somewhere on either side of, well, on the higher side, usually 60% from Cheney, 40% from the Equispeds for the same reason she explained. Sometimes in this drought, we have tried to push closer to 50-50. So what happens during higher demand times of the year, we still need both sources. We've only have a certain amount of water rights. We've got all the water rights at Cheney. We all know that Cheney's struggling. We've got a certain amount of appropriated water rights within the well field. During our higher demand times of the season, it's still necessary to use a pretty close blend of both. But as Laura said, and we'll be doing this during our performance testing, is running through the different blends. We'll be running 100% surface water through the plant, 100% groundwater, and a blend right in between. But we have so much more flexibility with this new plant, which helps us be more drought resistant and be able to respond to the drought conditions. And I think that, that last item that you asked about was probably looking more to the future and being able to provide capacity. One thing I might mention is if we end up at a spot where this plant stays there, right, which is our recommendation, we do have the ability in the future, if growth takes off, if our community really expands and we have a need based on industry, whatever it might be, Laura showed those estimated capacity demands up front. If we ever started pushing up against that, we can take a look at bringing this facility back online as a water treatment plant and increasing overall capacity. That's not out of the question. It's one of the values of keeping it there. While I'm here, I'll give you one more something real quick, and we'll get more information together for you when we bring this to council. Back on that very first one with the estimated cost, it's going to be very time-consuming and very meticulous taking this plant apart because of what it's been used for. We expect that there's going to be some regulatory requirements and permitting requirements of what can be done with disposal of certain equipment. For those of you that have been through that plant and seen the close proximity and the tight quarters of what it takes, it'll take specialized equipment to take some of this apart. There's going to be some requirements for sanitation of certain parts of it. There is a lot underground that most people don't see, and that work would be done in close proximity to very critical infrastructure. As you know, it has pump stations, stays in operation. We've got large piping that continues to surround the perimeter. Some of Laura's diagrams showed that, so we can't just go in here with a wrecking ball and an excavator and take this out. It's going to take time. That's where that cost starts to jump really quick. And then to be able to make it a buildable site, it's going to take some engineering fill. You don't just shove sand back in the hole. That's where we start to add up those costs really fast to get to that $50 to $75 million number.
Oh, Gary, you just let the scrappers go in. They'll get it taken care of in 2 weeks.
We could try that too.
What are the pitfalls to number 7? Why is that not a little further up the list as far as recommendations?
The main reason that one was not higher up on the list is because of the startup time. So 6 and 7 would both take about a week to start up, not counting the construction, but even after construction is completed. Due to the water treatment process, 6 and 7 both take about a week to actually come back online to develop the concentration of chemicals that are needed to treat the water with this method.
You further add, because there's a difference between 6 and 7 with soft water, which is what we currently have, versus hard water in the options that staff recommends, which is 4 and 5. The difference and in how a customer would feel the difference.
They would be getting hard water with options 4 and 5 as opposed to soft water that we're getting today. If anybody's familiar with your typical well water in the area, that's going to, have the potential to leave behind a residue. It could be different. It could have an impact on industries in the area that use a particular hardness or softness of their water. So it could have an impact to change the water quality that we would be producing. But again, we're only talking about this in terms of an emergency use. So if we have a catastrophe at the plant, this is providing running water, safe running water to customers. It's not ideal, and we'd obviously like to get it back to the water quality that we're used to as soon as possible. So this is a really an emergency use only situation designed to be temporary.
And just to be clear, if we ever do get, our economy takes off, we need more than 120, there's plenty of room at the new water treatment plant to expand that water treatment plant. That's what we were told when there was gave a tour of it.
There's plenty of space. We have set the plant up that it would be ready for expansion, but it's not cheap. And so I think at that time, we'd still have the option to weigh expansion of that plant versus what we could do with the current plant and see where we end up best economically.
I have a question. This kind of goes back a lot of slides too, just for historical context. When we go back to slide, I think it was 30 on yours, just because I think it goes with Councilman Johnston's question. What happened in 2005 that we had that high of water rates?
As far as I know, it's not something that specifically happened, but water usage across the country has been declining since 2005 as water conservation and more water-saving devices have become more prevalent. So I don't think it was necessarily a specific thing that happened, but it's been trending downward across the country for just water usage trends in general. Okay, it just seemed like an outlier compared to everything else. Now going back to the other slides, I think staff's in the right direction. I'm very interested in the emergency use and bringing it up as quick as possible. A day would be incredible. There's not that many communities in the country that would be able to do that. Now, when we look at slide, I think it's 28 on yours. Well, I don't know what it is actually on yours. It's the last slide, the budget considerations and comments. Yeah. So it's the currently budgeted is the capital overlay of 27 million. That's in this. Is that budget in the CIP currently? Yes. Budget in the CIP. Was that part of the original budget allocation of the water treatment facility as a whole, or is this added subsequently? Or is this part of the original budget when we were doing the design of the water treatment facility? This, I believe, has always been a separate line item in our CIP.
But it's been a separate line item for a while. It's not added later on. Okay. And then, so because it's budgeted, because the ongoing maintenance is budgeted, this in particular would not be an increase to water rates because we're not adding anything. This is already budgeted. This will not increase rates based on any of the proposals, with maybe the exception of 1 and 4 parts of 6, correct?
Correct, but I will say these are high-level cost estimates. We would still need to go through our diligence of getting a more refined engineer's cost estimate, so these numbers could change, but we expect it to be enough for most of the emergency use options.
So, when the public hears about this, when the media reports about this, adding redundancy to our system, with the exception of, or most of the options, will not increase water rates.
Correct.
Or the redundancy aspect will not.
Correct. We've known this is coming. We've had it accounted for some time.
So, thank you.
I think the question has to be asked too, what else could we do with that 27 million?
Well, Mayor, if I can, that's going to be discussed next because there are a lot of pressures on our water rates right now that go to refine cost estimates for operation of the new plant, what inflation has done to us since our original estimates, as well as our capital needs for the plant. And so we're going to talk about all that next. So if you have savings, if you spend less than what we had budgeted, that's going to help us in terms of our overall pro forma. So,
which is why I would like to see number 7 have a little bit more research, given that that one is the one that provides the greatest cost savings, but it also doesn't take into account the next conversation, which is water rates and sewer rates.
So if I could jump in on that, I served on the committee. We actually talked about that quite a bit, and number 7 was the first thing I asked about. The question that the council has to decide is, do you want 500,000 people to wait 1 week to be able to access water, or 1 or 2 days? And it really comes down to that. The soft water, I think, is probably the preference for everyone, but if something catastrophic were to happen, our decision would be either allowing water access in 24 hours or 7 days. That's really the crux of what we have to decide.
I also have one quick question. We talked about tornadoes, we've talked about earthquakes, we've talked about floods. One thing that's not in this proposal regarding is acts of terrorism, cyber attacks, any acts of terrorism. Will both of these plants be on separate systems? So if one was attacked in terms of a cyber attack, the other one isn't mitigated. Is there a possible way to mitigate those on 2 different systems, or is that even possible? I don't know the technology for that.
That's a discussion for another time.
Okay.
All right, well, that is all that I had. So, if there are any other questions, we can come back with a little bit more information about the questions you asked today.
I would just say thank you. I can only imagine how much work that was, and I appreciate you bringing forth so many different options. This is in my district, and it's such a cool building and has so much to offer, so hopefully we can find the best option.
Yep. Thank you.
Mayor, transition into the rate discussion now. And as I mentioned, there are a lot of moving pieces on this one. So Gary's going to summarize where we are today. And by the way, we wanted to bring it to you early. Many times we wait until November or early December, and we thought the council would want some time to think through this before we actually bring an action item.
Thank you, Bob. Mayor and council members, again, Gary Jansen, Public Works and Utilities. I want to thank Laura. She did a really good job with that. Appreciate all your questions, so that we've got some more work we need to do when we bring that forward, but we certainly appreciate your input. So I want to talk about where we're at on annual water and sewer rates discussion, what our projections are, particularly in compared to what we've looked at over some years now since 2019, what kind of projected rates were at that time. The manager mentioned we've seen some considerable pressures, especially with inflationary impacts and some other issues that I'll talk about as we go through here that lead to what our current recommendation is going to be. So we'll talk about rate drivers in the 10-year expenditure history. I mentioned the record inflation. I'll show you some specific examples of where that's impacting us. CIP and O&M factors. Obviously, the CIP is a big part of this and what we do with utility, and I'll talk in more detail about that. Efforts to maintain rate predictability over a longer period of time. Again, starting back in 2019 in particular, we wanted to provide as much predictability as we could looking at over a 10-year forecast. We still want to do that. We still want to keep these rates as flat as we can and avoid spikes anywhere. But because of certain economic drivers, we need the ability to start being a little bit more flexible from 1 year to the next. And so I'll talk about how those things wrap together. We've got a recommended base adjustment, what the resulting debt coverage is, which is very important to our performance and how we look at how this all rolls together. What the impacts would be on customers, our rates versus peer cities, and then the affordability and assistance programs, which we think are very important annually to discuss with the council. We've got some routine user fee updates that happen every 2 years, and then some other options, including where we're at with late fee percentages, the conservation tiers, which is something we talked about before we going into mandatory water restrictions. I want to kind of hit on that again to see if that's something we want to discuss for the future, and then the summary and next steps. So I mentioned the same rate plan has been shared with the City Council since December of 2019. This line that you see on here probably looks fairly familiar. Despite many significant changes since that time, the rate plan has not changed. And some of that has to do, again, with our hope and priority to keep rate adjustments predictable over that period of time. Still want to do that, but we need to look at going in a little bit different direction than where we had been with that 2019 plan because of all of these things that we're currently looking at. That plan is no longer sustainable due to record inflation, operational changes, and other challenges. Additionally, O&M costs related to our new water treatment facility that were previously estimated are now known. I mentioned before, and I want to mention again, our goal is still to keep the rates level and avoid rate spikes anytime that we can, and I think we're still doing a good job with that, even with the recommendation that you'll see today and moving forward. So looking at a really big factor here in our discussion today, we could probably focus on inflationary impacts and what that's done across the size of our operations and the maintenance of our utility more than anything. So look at a 10-year history, the blue line being water expenses, green being sewer. Our rate model assumptions, going back to that 2019 rate model that we looked at, were 3% O&M inflation. That included estimated debt based on the CIP and additional expenses beyond inflation that are factored in individually. And what those are is anything that's new, changes in commodity costs, staffing, anything that wouldn't be considered part of just an inflationary impact to O&M. Those average O&M cost increases in the past 3 years have been 10% in water and 7% in sewer. So you can see that alone is a significant difference from our projection of what happened, our projection of what we thought might happen back when that 2019 model was developed. Our consultant, our financial consultant for developing the cost of service analysis in 2022, NewGen, they had recommended at that time in 2022 increasing inflationary assumptions. They also recommended higher rate increases than were ultimately put into the 2019 plan. We made a decision at that time to go ahead and move forward with those lower rate increases to see what would happen, not look to raise things right then. We are now at that point that we have seen the impact since 2019. What has happened is what was predicted at that time, and so we need to be able to address that going forward. These are some specific examples of what's happened with inflationary impact to our operations and maintenance. On the left is chemical costs, the blue being for water, green being for sewer. After holding steady for years, chemical prices shot up $2 million in just the past 3 years. We're not sure yet where that's headed, keeping a close eye on it, but keep in mind we've got two water plants to run for some period of time. Adding to those commodities costs, which inflation will impact. If you look to the graph on the right, shows what the impact to contract services versus the savings from staffing vacancies. So the red line is salaries and benefits of our staff. While you do see some savings in that, it's not offsetting the increases that we've seen in contractual costs due to inflationary impacts. We're still doing what we can to get people hired, but we are struggling in certain areas, especially on the water side and water distribution, some of the things that we've talked about before related to salary impacts in the market. But right now, being able to make things work this way, that gap is really starting to close, but we're not able to offset those contractual savings with savings from personnel, again, due to inflation.
Gary, since last week's, this is specific to last week, actually, contracts and water operators. Have you seen any increased interest since last week, just knowing that media covered it, we talked about it, and then we really raised awareness that we need more water operators experienced?
We did get a lead on one operator almost immediately afterwards. I don't know what that can be led to, so we're working on that. Still working with HR through some of the things we talked about as far as providing additional incentives. We want to get our own staff an opportunity to consider that, but we hope to be out on the street really getting after that soon. So we're hopeful, we'll keep our fingers crossed. We got off to a good start. We'll see if that one pans out. Some other things, not all increases are as drastic as chemicals and contract services, but still add up to a significant impact. And these are just some small examples, but things that we look at across the entire utility. Some of those examples are bank fees being up 156%, energy and other utilities up 12%, technology charges 20%, and insurance premiums on our facilities up 47%. Collectively, it really starts to add up compared to what we had projected within our model for inflationary impact. So I want to talk about changes related to Wichita Water Works. This is on the operations and maintenance side. I'll talk about the capital side in just a moment. So if we start at the left and look at 2019 assumptions, the chemicals for a new water treatment plant were assumed to be $269,000 increase starting in 2025. At the current rates, again, impacted by inflation, that would be $721,000 starting next year. That's a big increase just by itself. Energy for the new plant was estimated to be $600,000 with that increase starting in 2025. That is now estimated to be $900,000. Those unit price inflations, again, since the time of original estimation 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago. Staffing, at the time, keep in mind in 2019, we were just starting to develop design of what this plant, how it would operate, what it would take for staffing of the facility. We had assumed in 2019 that temporary contract services costing just under $600,000 in 2024, $1.2 million in 2025 would be utilized for the transition period, and no additional ongoing expenses moreover than just our staff to keep the new plant going. Since that time, as we've figured out the complexities of this plant, so I would tell you that this question's been asked a lot. So this plant was designed and built to save on capital costs in particular. If you keep in mind what we've talked about, the funding sources that we utilize with WIFI and SRF saved the ratepayers over $180 million on this project. We did everything we could because of the size of this project to keep capital costs down. While this is a new plant, there's new innovation, there's new technology. That doesn't mean that it takes less people. We have come to find out over time that we're going to need more staff than we've got now to make sure that we keep this plant moving forward, especially during the first couple years. Like anything new, and especially something of this size and complexity, we're going to need more staff. We got to make sure we get this right during the transition period and going forward. So the current assumption then is $1.5 million in 2024, just over $2 million in 2025, and that would be ongoing. What happens at that point, once the old plant comes offline, we may have, we'll start to have a better idea of just how many staff we do need. And I think we start to balance that out through a couple ways. We balance that out through attrition, and something I'm going to talk about on the next slide is we're going to be moving towards finishing up our B&R improvements in 26 and 27. Some of that staff we think probably will move in that direction because we're going to need additional resources there also, just like we need now. So again, the original plan was to contract temporary service providers for the transition period. The decision was made in conjunction with the City Council and discussions we had to hire our own staff. Mayor, the point you just brought up, we're continuing to work on that. And hopefully we'll have luck of finishing up hiring the operators because we've got pretty much the rest of those 20 positions filled at this time. But the one thing I want to mention while I'm on this slide, because it's a question that comes up often, including when I've been here and just in the last few days about this discussion, the capital costs for this project are all part of the current rate structure. Anything that we've done and brought to you on the capital side, we're currently at $569 million overall capital costs. That's all part of the current rate structure. In March, when the City Council approved an additional $16 million, that was part of the current rate structure. We had that built in as a contingency, knowing that there were some things that were going to have to happen off-site in particular, but not knowing those costs up front. So anything we're talking about today, and when we talk about where we're going with a recommended rate increase, none of it has to do with the capital cost, that nearly $600 million cost of the facility, but it does include the need for some additional operational support and staffing as we're discussing here. Talk about changes related to our B&R project I just mentioned, but I'll hit on this again. So for salaries and benefits for staffing, the 2019 assumption was just over $500,000. Starting in 2026, that's an increase and a $1 million in 2027. continuing indefinitely with annual inflation. We don't have any changes yet. We will be working on a market analysis over the next probably 12 to 18 months, just like we've done with the water treatment plant, to be able to determine the impact of this assumption. So I think we've got the ability to come back to that probably this time next year and see where we're at based on the rate projections at that time. Chemicals and energy, in 2019, we assumed no changes based on information available at that time. In 2019, we weren't near as far along with development of a BNR plan as we were for Wichita Water Works. Right now, the current assumption is an additional $864,000 in 2025, $1.7 million in 2026 for chemicals. Energy is just under $150,000 in 26 and double that starting in 2027. And I know I've belabored it already, but just to remind you, that's inflationary impact. So, you know, we'll hope only get us so far, but we'll hope that we'll start to see some leveling out of the inflationary impact, steadying that out. That goes back to my point of the value in us being able to evaluate this with you on an annual basis, and hopefully being able to, regardless of what our projections may have been in the past further out, that we can balance those out, come back, find ways to create savings, or at least deal with this on a year-by-year basis, more so than we had in the past. One thing I meant to mention on that too is the odor control technology selection and treatment process better defined the concept and the final design of BNR. Odor control is a huge component of BNR, something we've talked about a lot. We wanted to make sure we got that right. Once that process was better defined, it helped us to kind of dial in on what these numbers look like. So talking about our CIP and what this does for dictating what the rates are. So utilities is a capital-intensive business. We maintain, you've heard me talk about these numbers before, but I'll just run through a couple with you real quick because I'm always impressed when I look back and see just how large our system is and what it takes, why we have this rate structure in place for improvements to infrastructure, operation and maintenance, everything that we do to run the system. We maintain over 4,500 miles of water and sewer pipes, 60 sewer lift stations, 8 treatment plants of various types, 160,000 water meters, of 56,000 sanitary sewer manholes, 53,000 water valves, a lot of stuff going on, stuff that we need to continue maintaining on a regular basis to make sure we can provide clean, safe water for our community. All of this is needed to serve, as Laura mentioned, 17% of the population of the state. So the pie chart on the left shows that most of the revenue increases that we derive from the rates are needed for infrastructure. And you can see the orange being CIP, the green or yellow being O&M. So we utilize the CIP, though, for renewal and replacement primarily. So it's also helping us with operations and maintenance. It's helping us replace old assets, old facilities. I work really close with our staff and encourage them to really stay on track of keeping capital projects moving because the value that it brings to our daily operations staff to keep our facilities upgraded so that we can limit, hopefully, and reduce the amount of deferred maintenance. That's where the CIP becomes so critical. If you look at the top chart on the right, it shows a 10-year sewer CIP by function, and I'll talk about some more details in just a moment. The blue being renewal and replacement, the orange being expansion, and I'll show you what some of those look like. 10-year water CIP is on the bottom. Looks very similar. Blue being renewal and replacement is the majority, orange being expansion. There's some other that's in there for a new treatment plant that we didn't categorize just yet, but just so you know what that's for. But we really gained so much value out of what's in our CIP here. But there's some additional slides to this packet that if we get to, I kind of wanted to have for backup if we don't, if you have a chance to look at, that shows what we've done to reprioritize capital projects in an effort to stay within the current rate structure for this year and to minimize the rate impact going forward. But it's so valuable to still be able to have those projects in there. Continuing to talk about the CIP, the 2025 to 2034 approved CIP includes almost $800 million in water and sewer improvements. That 10-year CIP does not include some of the things you see below it. So all in our debt service within the current rate structure is almost $2 billion. So you can start to see how all of this adds up when you look at the inflationary impacts and operations and maintenance, what is needed on the capital side to keep our system in the condition that we need it to be in and keep it moving forward. I'll talk about some of the projects on the right so that you know. So distribution mains replacement for water, that is replacing existing neighborhood water mains. That's where we've gained a lot of ground over the years. When we talk about lead and copper and removal of lead service lines, that's where most of that's been taken care of. It provides a lot of good things and improvements for neighborhoods. But I'm not going to hit on all of these. Phased water supply plan, which is shown as expansion, that is actually focused for looking at long-term water supply. That's recharge basins in the Equus beds so that we can keep the aquifer in great shape. That is improvements to the local well field where we have water rights around our current water treatment plant so that we can maximize those water rights, especially now in times of drought. There's other things that's going on with Hess Pump Station. Within the sewers, there's an expansion project right in the middle called Sewer Mains for Future Development. That has been a critical key to furthering development in our community, providing the ability to fund projects up front. Sewer is the most expensive aspect of being able to expand and to develop, whether it's residential or commercial. So that's been the city's commitment for some time. That's all part of what we're looking at. I mentioned the 60-some lift stations that we have. So we have annual funds in there for rehab and replacement of those lift stations to be able to keep those critical infrastructure going.
Gary, can you go back to that slide?
Yes.
I think this is a nice segue. I think we get asked a lot of questions, especially during this drought, about getting water from El Dorado Lake. And I want just to give perspective to the capital improvement projects already underway regarding water. What would something like El Dorado Lake, if we even had the water rights, can you talk about just approximate dollars?
So we had projected, and you'll see it if you look in the back slides, looking at the idea of we have a single pipeline from Cheney right now, approximately 20 miles. We had projected in the future, if we were going to add a redundant line or replace that line, of starting to approach $100 million. So it kind of depends on size, may not need to be as big, but it's going to be probably somewhere in that magnitude to be added to this if we were ever. You mentioned, and I won't get stuck on that part, that it's just really not feasible, even from a cost perspective, to get that water. But it would be expensive to bring a pipeline all the way from El Dorado.
We also did a study working with City of El Dorado, who was more than happy to work with us. And what we found, our consultant found, is that at the time that we got into significant drought, that would be the period of time that El Dorado would have the least capacity to be able to help us. So if we needed a constant source of water to meet our regular demand, that's a very different scenario than simply needing help during a drought period. And Gary, I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, but we did do due diligence and again, appreciated the opportunity to work through that with El Dorado.
I'm glad to hear us continue to tell the same story. So I got that from you before, so we're on the same page. That's great. Good on that? Continuing to look at rate drivers, and I might just kind of I just want to make sure we have a good understanding, and I think it's good. Sometimes when I talk to the public too, they don't quite understand what all goes into when they pay their water bill, and so we wanted to be as comprehensive as we could. So if you look at part of our debt service and the debt payments and the principal and interest, so this chart reflects principal and interest payments on revenue bonds, WIFIA loans, and SRF loans already in place. You can see, if you kind of start from the left, the principal and interest had been holding steady, but is getting ready to shoot up, and that's a result of market conditions. You never know what happens going forward. We'll keep a close eye on this, but some of these don't necessarily change the terms of the loan dome. But I just wanted to show this as the impact also to our overall pro forma and rate structure. So talk a little bit more about some efforts to stabilize rate adjustments in addition to some of the things we've already hit on. So in one of the back slides too, and I didn't mean to shortchange you, but I wanted to make sure we could get through the things we wanted to, but there's some additional slides behind what would be the end slide here that I can hit on too. It shows what we've done with our utilities optimization program. I want to mention real quick, Laura has led this effort for some time and done a tremendous job working across all of our facilities to find ways to optimize savings. And I can show you that on that other slide and what that means, but I think it's going to work even on our new plant. As soon as we get going, we're going to start looking at ways to optimize energy savings, what we're doing with staffing I talked about, all these things, that energy savings, chemical savings, but that's our goal with what she has done and with her group from an asset management standpoint, I think has really helped. So that's already included in here. Some other things that we've done, for example, the call center saved just over $111,000 by adding 5 full-time staff and eliminating the use of temporary services, which resulted in wait times and other metrics being improved in the process. So always looking for those opportunities. $100,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a lot by itself, but multiple items like that really start to add up. The e-bill campaign increased the number of customers billed electronically, cutting printing and postage costs by about $5,000 the first year. Again, not a big number. These are opportunities we're always looking for savings. Got great staff that's looking at these, what we can do. I hear it from them constantly. So operational savings are not enough to overcome inflation and other challenges. Continuously reviewing the CIP for opportunities to defer, revise, or eliminate projects. I talked about what I said when I encourage staff. I spend time with them too. We've got a pretty good structure in place where we continue to review the CIP, especially looking at any time during the year where we're starting to see stresses and pressures on the pro forma, on the current rates, where we need to start moving some things out. We do the best that we can to balance that. This year we're kind of getting to a point that there's not much else to balance out or to move out. We've reduced contingency levels in the financial model over time, which is not always ideal. We need to have some level of flexibility and resiliency to be able to respond to unknown things that might happen. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in just a minute when we talk about the impact of the drought, which really we don't know yet, and it's not impacting this discussion today, but it could be going forward. We've pursued favorable financing opportunities, which we've talked about before with WIFIA and SRF. So this chart will look familiar to some of you. Back when we started talking about the recommended rates in 2019, showed the difference in rate projections with and without WIFIA and SRF. So the red line was the combined utilities rates without WIFIA. The blue line was combined with WIFIA and SRF. You can see those double-digit rates projections in the early years was not desired by the council, and I'm certain it was not desired by the community. That eventually came down to the rates that we've looked at from that 2019 model to stabilize and level out over a longer period of time. There was a discussion about generational equity with the council at that time. It probably makes sense so that as many people as possible are paying for these major project improvements, right? So those boxes up to the top right at the time when it projected the 2028 customer bill, you'll see on the right with WIFIA and SRF, the projection was $116.32. With the recommended rate increase that we'll be talking to you about yet today and then coming back to the council later, the majority of our users, the mid-level user, let me say this first because that was based on mid-level use. The mid-level user would be at $109.29, so we've still even come down from that, $7 a month. The majority of our users, which is a less use, their bill would be $73.54. So it's not necessarily a fair comparison because this was mid-level, but I just want to kind of give you some perspective on what those numbers look like. So getting to the point of rate adjustments, what our recommended base rate adjustment is going to be compared to what it was in 2019. So the orange line is the 2019 rate plan. Looking out to 2025, recommended a rate increase of 5.03%. Here in December is a recommended combined rate increase of 6.14%. All of the things that we've talked about play into this. We think it's important to be able to move forward with the projects that we need to do. I talked about on the CIP side the impact that has on O&M. I'll show you what that means for bills in just a minute, but I want to talk about what this includes and what it doesn't include. So this would include the full adopted CIP and reductions or revisions proposed by staff. So we have split some things out, moved some things out. That's on some later slides to help accommodate this so this number's not higher. The adopted budget, all existing debt, 2 remaining BNR, SRF loans for BNR not issued yet, future revenue bonds, what we talked about for Wichita Waterworks transition staff and contract services, and that this mentions the $300,000 annual O&M for the main water treatment plant Laura talked about. That is already in, I just want to be clear, that is already in the current rate structure. This recommended rate increase is not needed to accommodate that, but I just want everybody to know that's one of the things that's included. What's not included is funding for changes in lead and copper or emerging contaminants, PFAS regulations. Laura talked about that. We should know more soon. If you had the opportunity, I sent some information to mayor and council members recently about where we're at on that. There's not an immediate timeline on what that's going to happen, but there's some unknowns of particularly of what happens on the private side. I think we've got time, though, once we figure out what that looks like, to start looking at future rate structures and how that might play in. Revenue losses are not included from 2 wholesale customers who are building their own treatment plants. Derby is working on building a water treatment plant. They don't have enough water rights to take themselves completely off of being a wholesale customer of ours, but what they would like to do is be able to take care of the peak demand times on their end, which is good for conservation for us, but it has to be factored into our revenue projections. City of Valley Center is looking at building a water treatment plant that would take them fully off of our system. Timing isn't sure yet, but we'll be looking ahead at what the impacts those would have. I mentioned before, this does not include revenue losses or operating cost increases due to prolonged drought conditions. So I don't know what the number looks like. We know during September, compared to our projections, we did have a loss in revenue of where we thought we would be had we been under normal conditions with precipitation. I talked about building capacity into our rate structure. That's something that helps because of those types of unknowns. We'll see what happens this spring. If we come around to being in the same place, hopefully not, but if we're still under water restrictions, we'll have to evaluate where we're at and see what impact that might have on our revenue. I get asked about this a lot in the public because there's concern that we're telling people to use less water and then are we going to raise rates? That's a question that's asked. One of the reasons why I want to illustrate just the size of our system and what it takes to operate and maintain a utility of our size, this is built on a long time of building this system to accommodate 500,000 people within our region to be a regional water provider. That's based on projected revenue over a certain period of time. And anywhere that changes, whether we lose customers, whether we lose revenue because of the drought, we have to make that up somewhere else to be able to operate and maintain that system the same way and make those capital improvements. So we'll see where that goes. We don't think we need anything else within this current recommendation to accommodate that. We've got some other things that are going on to help respond to the drought that we hope will make a difference, including a new water treatment plant. So that includes the discussion of additional contingencies to provide resiliency, which are not included in here.
Gary, can you go back to that slide? The wholesale customers, can you again kind of talk about how many wholesale customers we currently have and that they do pay a premium for this water, but can you talk about our relationship with other regional partners, because we provide 17% of water for Kansans, is that right?
We do. Our population is basically 17% of the entire state. So our population that we serve, including the wholesale customers. We have 11 wholesale customers. That includes 8 neighboring communities and 3 rural water districts. The majority of those wholesale customers pay a uniform wholesale rate that is more than our ratepayers in Wichita pay. Effectively, we looked at, because the question came up about our tiered structure, which I'll talk about in just a moment, how that compares to Wichita residents paying in a tiered structure wholesale, that wholesale uniform rate ends up paying out more than even if they were in our own tiered structure. So it costs more to produce that water. It costs more to get that water there. There's been a lot of analysis done over time with our cost of service analysis, looking at being able to, for cost recovery. And so I think we're in a pretty good place with that. And because of the discussions we've had with the drought, concerns from some in the community about how these contracts were set up, we are reevaluating where we're at on those customers. But I think right now we're in a pretty good place for that reason.
I guess it's more of a consideration, just making sure that cost recovery is top of mind while still being a good partner. I think when we talk about whether it's parking downtown, cost recovery has to be part of the conversation so that folks understand that there is a cost to maintain a lot of this infrastructure.
There is, thank you. So resulting debt coverage is something that we keep a really close eye on. Staff watches this closely. Our bond counsel watches this very closely. To maintain the utilities AA minus credit rating, a debt coverage level of 120% or above is required, and that's what's required by the credit rating agency. I'll show you another slide on this in just a moment of what this looks like if we maintain what the 2019 recommended rates would be. But the revised rate plan provides only enough coverage to meet the minimum requirement. It does not provide a safety net for unseen negative circumstances. So again, talking about we're still trying to be prudent here and take care of what we need to take care of, but we're still not really adding in any contingency for now. If we move forward with the recommended rate increase, that's something we'd certainly want to consider maybe then as we come into future years, seeing how things balance out this year with all of the things that we've added in. But you can see that that combined minimum required is the red line. That black line touches that for several years there as we've got a lot of things that are feeding into this. So customer impacts is something that we always want to look at with the council and make sure our customers understand. So 2024 bill is the second column from the left. We a lot of times look at the mid-volume user. I will tell you the majority of our users in this community, so 135,000 customers are residential customers. They use 50% of the water, but they're obviously, that's 90% of our customers are residential customers. They would fall in that low volume area, generally under 6,000 gallons per month. So the rate increase, the recommended rate increase at the 6.14%, you can see that dollar change for the 2025 plan would be an additional $3.21 per month. For a low user, $4.79 for a mid user. Keep going further to the right, that shows a comparison to what the 2019 recommended rate plan was. So if you look at that low volume user, the 2019 plan would have been an increase of $2.53 over the 2024 bill. And sorry, I know I'm kind of going backwards on this. If you look at the difference between the 2019 plan and the recommended 2025, is roughly 70 cents more than where we would have been on that 2019 projected path. Our recommendation today and going forward would be additional 70 cents per month for a low user on top of that. Peer cities comparisons, we always like to look at the I-35 corridor. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but Kansas City, Omaha, Des Moines, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, and Fort Worth, we are still, I think, in a good place. As far as being affordability for rates, this does look at the mid-level user. I'm not sure what this compares to lower users, but our total all-in bill comparison of $92 is 17% less than the next closest with Fort Worth.
I do have a quick question. Thank you for showing peer cities. Are there any peer cities that are less too? You show us as the least of all these peer cities. Were there any
think
other?
in the last year or two, we might have we considered some other cities of comparable size that weren't along the I-35 corridor. And if I remember, there was maybe one or two that were about the same or lower, but we were certainly in the bottom 10% of affordability.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we try to use these cities consistently for you, so you've got comparable cities in the region. We used to do outliers and folks on either coast, and it just didn't seem to give you the right
So
kind
we're
of
not just
information.
excluding any peer city just because it's lower. These are all
No,
peer
that's,
cities.
no, and you'll notice for a lot of purposes, we try to zero in on these cities, even when it's not favorable, when we've done comparisons.
Perfect, thank you.
Can we go back to the last slide real quick?
Yeah.
The one right before this, actually. Are these consistent as far as percent increases? Are we increasing it a certain percentage across the board, or?
We are, same percentage across the board.
Okay, so for industrial and commercial as well.
For all users. Is that not true, Joni?
Very last slide, all right.
Well, I'll get to that at the very last slide.
Okay.
Good question, and sorry I gave you the wrong answer. So we look at an EPA affordability metric every year. The EPA considers rates affordable if the annual cost is at or below 4.5% of the area's median household income. So there's a lot of information here. The median household income from Census Bureau site for Sedgwick County is just over $66,000. Wichita is just over $70,000. That percentage for a mid-user is 1.7% with the 2025 recommended bill, currently 1.6% for the 2024 bill. Still considerably lower than the 4.5% threshold that the EPA establishes for affordability. Assistance programs is something we like to always talk about. And I'll show you what's here. And you see the spike in 2023 we talked about last year for assistance programs, customer assistance funds used. Federal funds from 2021 to 2023 helped Americans with utility expenses in the wake of COVID-19. Assistance funds typically come from customer donations and 0.1% of water and sewer rate revenues as earmarked by the City Council in 2016. In 2024, that 0.1% is approximately $190,000. In 2025, it would be $202,000. Customer donations to the H2O program more than doubled after introducing online giving options this year. So private donations in 2023 were just over $4,000. This year, we received $9,000 as of July 31st. So people can donate to that through their water bill, and so they've stepped up and doubled it from 2023. We are expecting for 2024 to provide $55,000 in assistance, so that's considerably less than what was available. We continue to do everything we can through messaging on our water bills, working with the comms team at different times when we start talking about our rebate programs too, to make sure that folks who qualify know about these programs because they can provide valuable assistance. User fees, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's something that we do every 2 years. Just to give some quick examples of account, this is for cost recovery only. We analyze everything that we do to make these things happen, including driving time. That was something that we didn't have included before. I can tell you in our city engineer's office, with what they do for right-of-way permitting, that's critical. That takes a lot of the time, so it's got to be part of that consideration, just as an example. But for setting up new accounts, the fee would increase almost $20. Shut-off for non-payment is an increase of $12. Remember, this is done every 2 years. Standard grease maintenance fee, which for routine and clear manholes downstream of grease-producing businesses without a trap outside of the building. That increases $20 a year, again, for full cost recovery. Backflow testing increases $4 per year. Just some quick examples. This is all part of what we'll be bringing to you later with a full schedule of increased fees.
So who pays all of these fees? For example, the grease maintenance, is that restaurants only?
So that would be those that are required to have that by code. Yeah, that'd be restaurants.
Okay, and the rest of them, just depending on?
Yeah, so we've got licensed backflow testers. There are companies that have to be. We've got 25,000 backflow preventers across the city, have to be tested annually, have to be rebuilt every 5 years. So that's contractors that get those fees. The first two are direct fees, costs for our staff to be able to maintain these, monitor these, keep track of these, everything that goes with administrating these fees. So the first two would come back to our staff for cost recovery. One other thing we thought we might look at, really don't know what this would do for revenues because it might end up just being an incentive for more payment on time, but our late payment fee is equal to 1.5% of the unpaid balance that's been in place for many, many years. If you look at these same peer cities, Fort Worth is at 10%, Wichita, Tulsa, and Oklahoma City are all the same. We are recommending an increase to 5%. Again, we'll come back to this when we talk to you formally at the council meeting. From 2021 to 2023, the city averaged over 10,000 payment arrangements annually. So we try to work with people anytime that we can on payment arrangements. Approximately 8% of those were kept. So we had to start 10,000 payment arrangements. Not a lot of them stay in place. 8% were kept, 5% were canceled, 87% were broken, and less than 0.1% are still active. That doesn't mean we're not going to keep moving forward and still doing that. The utility is authorized to waive fees when warranted. We waived about just under $100,000 during that same period of time. Costs associated with late payments are administrative time to update accounts, reach out to customers with calls and notices, and eventually send accounts to collection. So something we want to think about. Again, this isn't necessarily being offered up as a revenue generator. It's really hard to tell where this would end up. It could be that this provides more incentive to get more payments on time, which is of value to us also.
Some of the actions that are on the previous slide as well as this, right now, what's happening are, for instance, those who are not doing appropriately what they should on the grease maintenance, or if they're not making payments, or if you go to the next slide, those who are not paying on time, those costs are being shifted to our good customers, right? To those who are making payments on a regular basis. So the cost we have for collection, we're not able to recover all of that from those who are not paying us, especially those that we have to go into collections, because we'll only recover a percentage of that through our final collection. So this is I like this idea of a late fee percentage increase so that we can discourage that and not have that burden fall on our regular rate payer.
What are some of the exemptions that we can use the waivers on for people who are late paying their fees?
Good question.
I would tell you, especially since my time being involved with them, but we try to really work with people any way that we can. Any type of hardships that there might be, I mean, there's financial thresholds, qualifications first and foremost on the assistance program that qualify, but we try to work with people, whether it's change in ownership, whatever it might be. I'll just tell you, with as many customers as we have, we see people quite often trying just to get out of paying a bill, but there are legitimate issues that come up. I think our staff has done a wonderful job of being empathetic and trying to work with them everywhere we can. I can get you some better examples. We hear quite a few different things that maybe we wouldn't expect, but we try to be as tolerant as we can, give people a chance, and we make a determination of how far we need to take that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I know we got a lot of good-hearted people that work for the city. I would be more comfortable if we have a policy that can outline that, or maybe some sort of dictation to staff as far as when it's appropriate to waive fees, especially for people who you get a little behind in your bills and it costs money to pull yourself out of it.
We usually don't waive fees, but we will give a payment plan allowing someone to make payment over an extended period of time. I don't think there's many times, we'll waive fees if we know there's a problem with a meter, or if someone's had a leak that they did not know about. And I think in those cases, we have waived the fees.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example, and thank you for that, Manager. We don't ever write off water consumption. If somebody has a leak, what'll happen usually is they'll move into another tier. We will look at the last couple of years during that same period of time, and we'll bring their rate back to that tier 1 fee over that same period of time. Substantial cost savings. We don't write off the water consumption. Just like the manager said, we're not going to generally waive fees or anything else. It's working out payment plans. It's working out other accommodations. So thank you for that clarification.
Well, it's not the fees overall, it's the late fees. Being able to work through some of the late fees with somebody, grandma who maybe their Social Security check went on the wrong day for the month, or
That's where
Some-
those
some.
payment plans come into
Right.
play and those types of agreements, so that those can be avoided, yes. All right, one other thing I
Can
want.
you,
Go ahead.
sorry, I'd like a follow-up to that. I just want, instead of anecdotal, actual situations where late fees are being levied on someone. I think the concept here is that the water is consumed or water is used. You can't put the water back into the system. So it was consumed in some way. So there is a cost to an individual, whether late or not late. So I'd like, I guess, more of that information so that we can help community understand that the city of Wichita tries its very best to accommodate individuals who may have just forgotten, but we are trying to encourage people to, whether it's do auto payment so that there won't be a late fee because it will automatically be taken out of your account. So can you give us more of those numbers instead of just anecdotally?
Well, we can. I can give you some good examples. There's a lot going on. You heard me talk about that 10,000 number, because we also get folks, just quite frankly, that try to take advantage of it too. So we have a lot of things to sort through. Staff does a great job, but I think what I could certainly put together is some really good examples of where we have done this. No, there's not a lot of typical days. We see some of the same types of requests, but that's a great question. We can certainly show you what it is that we do.
Would you be able to show repeat
Sure.
customers
Yeah.
that keep doing it over and over again? Or are there customers that do that over and over
It
again?
varies. It varies. We continue to work with people depending on the circumstances. So I know what you're asking for, and we can get you that information. Okay, next thing I wanted to talk about, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this will look a little bit familiar. Something that we talked about before moving into mandatory water restrictions in August was talking about our tiered rate structure. So I'll focus on the bold numbers on that residential inside city. So we have tier 1, which is 110% of average winter consumption. Average winter consumption is determined from December to March. Throughout the rest of the year, your usage determines which tiers you pay in. A lot of folks obviously get into the warmer months, and irrigation pushes them into tiers 2 and 3. Not quite as much as we had. We're still seeing some of that. Not quite as much as we had over the last year. But so what this shows now is the fees associated with tiers 1, 2, and 3. This applies to residential and commercial customers both. I mentioned we have 135,000 residential customers. We have almost 17,000 commercial customers that use a considerable amount of water. These increasing block rates like we have are recognized by the water industry, including the American Water Works Association, as an effective and efficient way to promote conservation. This is done across the country in many communities. I talked about NewGen earlier. We engaged them in April of this year to analyze our existing rate tiers and see if it made some sense to try to impact conservation, which I'll show you some other numbers in just a moment. The goal was to achieve maximum conservation while remaining revenue neutral. So you heard me talk earlier about potential revenue loss because people are using less water. The using less water is great. We've got to balance what that revenue loss looks like. This was set out to try and kind of balance both. We see almost 20% of our annual water consumption is during the hotter months, during the summer months, and most of that is from discretionary water use for irrigation. I don't have anything more to add to this today. There's a next slide I want to look at with you too, but if desired, we could revisit this to further incentivize water conservation. One of the biggest issues we ran into was those 17,000 commercial customers. Quite a few of those commercial customers necessarily move into especially tier 2 during the hotter months with non-discretionary water use. What they have to have for cooling processes, production, whatever it is that they're doing. We talked about Spirit. I'll just give that as an example again. When we were considering this, we looked at their usage numbers and talked to them about where that water goes to. It would be an increased cost of $3 million a year to them if we were to consider raising these tier 2 and 3 fees. Has nothing to do with outside watering. So there's other businesses I'm sure that impacts too. Trying to figure out how that impacts 17,000 commercial customers is going to be a real challenge.
Are there tiers even for commercial customers?
These tiers are the same. If you look over to those far two right columns, you'll see the commercial inside city, commercial outside city on this. It all applies. That's where the challenge is. If you get, I'm certain there's smaller manufacturers that support the aircraft industry that need cooling water during the hotter months that probably move into tier 2 would be impacted by a rate increase that has nothing to do with outdoor watering. So that's our challenge. I think if we want to look further into this, we're going to have to investigate that more and maybe look at a different way to do this. You know,
Gary, can you say that one more time about the water with the manufacturing, whatever you just said?
So there's, and the Spirit was a good example. Spirit during the summer months, they need cooling water, right, for their manufacturing processes. They already pay tier 2 and 3 rates. It's part of their business model. If we were to raise the rates that I'm going to show you in just a minute that we talked about previously, we had considered a possible rate increase. It was going to add $3 million to their annual cost while using non-discretionary water for running their business. Has nothing to do with watering, outdoor irrigation. My other comment was, I'm sure there's smaller machine shops around that support the aircraft industry that the same thing would happen to. Not on the scale of $3 million, but they would see it, they probably pay tier 2 rates now, part of their business model, part of their financing plan. Anything we would add to it, though, we don't have a way to separate that right now. So give you a quick idea of some options we could look at. This would be a lot to undertake. Ideally, if you could figure out a way to get all commercial businesses to be on a separate lawn meter, right? How you go about doing that, considerable cost. That's another base rate fee. That's 17,000 more meters. Probably not all of them are irrigating, but that's a bunch more meters that we've got to maintain. That's more accounts we've got to track, something we could look at. Maybe commercial customers could go to more of a uniform rate that would be more focused on tier 1 base rate, because most of their water is focused on what they do as a business. And even if they water outside, it's not going to add a lot to it. I think those are the types of things we could look into further, but we would need some time to do that. I don't think this is something that we can consider now, but I wanted to bring this up again. This is the numbers we looked at previously. This is not a recommendation today. This is what we talked about prior to the mandatory water restrictions. And so with our goal, if you look at that right column, basically tier 2 and 3 rates more than doubled. But this is what's needed to incentivize, continuing to incentivize conservation. New Gen advised that other communities have done the same thing because most of this water use on the residential side is discretionary water use outdoor. If you look at the revenues, we tried to remain revenue neutral. Considering our numbers, that was pretty close. And that saved an estimated 1.4 billion gallons a year. I tried to look and see. It's really hard to tell how that compares to what happened with water restrictions so far. I'm sure our mandatory water restrictions to 1 day a week saved more water than that did, for what it's worth. So that's all part of that puzzle we would have to examine. I just wanted to show you this again. I don't have a recommendation today, but I think it's something that we could look at going forward, especially as we continue to navigate the drought.
And give you an idea of what options could be. You could have a requirement that all commercial and industrial businesses have irrigation meters, and then we could apply these new tiered rates to their irrigation uses, which would put them on the same footing as residential. That's just one. I mean, there's going to be a lot of options that we're going to ask the consultant to take a look at.
Okay. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm interested in more about the conservation tiered rates as well. I mean, if we want to encourage conservation and we're trying to address the water rates, I think that probably makes the most comprehensive. I know that there might be a lot more going into that. You know, when we talk about Spirit in particular, they use a lot of gray water. Do we delineate between that in terms of pricing right now?
We do. There's a different rate for the reuse, correct.
So there is a different, so their reuse is already probably a lower rate than.
It's all right. It's at a separate rate. Yes, it's a different rate.
So I'd be interested in exploring this more because I think it solves two issues and not just one facing the community, and a long-term issue too.
I think it probably makes sense for us to move forward with further investigation with our consultant to see You know, right now, yesterday it rained for the first time in 27 days, right? So looking at the forecast of a dry winter, it's not likely that we're going to be in a much different place than we're at now come next spring. Let's hope that we are. But either way, we really need to start looking forward to the future. Even if we come out of this drought at some point in time like we did in 2013, we need to do everything we can to protect ourselves going forward, which I know you know. So I think this is prudent that we move forward with this evaluation. It's not going to be something that we'll have as part of a recommendation in December, but I would like to move forward and look at this more and what our options might be.
Could we look at possibly breaking it up into for commercial only 4 or 5 tiers?
I think we can, in discussions I had with NewGen in April, they've got a really good handle on this, and they have a really good idea of what's worked in other communities and what will be impactful. So we'll rely on their expertise, but sure, I think we can look at just about anything.
Okay.
Taking that into consideration, you just mentioned there's 17,000 commercial customers, and if adding 17,000 meters, irrigation meters, what would the cost be on staff time? I think those are also things to take into consideration.
We'll add that too. And, you know, not all of them are going to have it. There's a lot of businesses in this community that don't irrigate. But those who want to, if you looked at that scenario, would be required to do that. We will absolutely include that as part of the analysis. Because there does, again, every single one of those meters that is added, we own and maintain, so it adds to our burden also, which has to be part of that rate structure to recover those costs. Okay, this is the last regular slide I have. I'm going to mention this real quick and then go to the other few. That way I can be done with this because I know you've got a whole nother item to go. So our next steps is to refine recommendations for 2025 based on the feedback we've gotten today. It's been great feedback. There's some additional information we want to provide. And then sometime in December, we'll be requesting approval for the 2025 rate fee adjustments. I wanted to show you this one in particular. This again is the combined all-in debt coverage, the red line being the minimum required, 120%, black line being based on our recommendation of 6.14% rate increase. Green is if we stay on track with the projected rate or suggested rate increases from 2019. So you can see we dip well below that red line for a considerable number of years. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. If you want to look at this later, this is what I talked about for CIP changes to stabilize rate adjustments. You can see on the right column where we delayed projects, we reduced projects, we respread funding to different years, doing everything that we can to help the cause here. This is just the second one of the same thing. That second line down is that line I mentioned is almost $100 million to run a parallel pipeline from Cheney when you asked about El Dorado. Utilities optimization, this was the $7 million we talked about. I won't spend a lot of time here. Some of the savings came from large water meter replacements over time as water meters start to fail. They're not accurate readings, so we're losing a lot of water revenue from inaccurate readings. Renewable energy programs, LED replacements, things that we were doing with our sewer treatment plant to take some loading off of that, working with the Southwest Power Pool. And then we've got modeled savings, which I talked about we'll do with the new plant on preventative maintenance over corrective. This gets to your question, Councilmember Hoheisel, that I'm glad Joni was here to correct me. This shows what the rate impacts would be across the classes. So if you look at 2025 in particular, top left, water, just water, sewer, combined to 6.14 at the bottom. But for residential customers is different. Commercial is actually more. This is all part of our cost of service analysis over years for equity, to balance the equity based on what it costs to get water to each of the types, to maintain the facilities. And so that came to me after you asked that question of why these are not the same. But this gives you an idea of what these looks like. This does show a projection for 10 years. I mentioned before, and I'll mention one more time, we want to do everything we can to keep this level, to keep this predictable, to limit spikes. But we really need this conversation every year, especially with the economic climate we're in, to make sure that we're still on the right track. So that's the last thing I had. Thank you for bearing with me, and I'm happy if you got any more questions.
Is the residential or the sewer rates higher than the commercial because of usage?
That's a good question, Joni, on the sewer. Just in balancing the cost recovery. And so every time we do this cost of service analysis every 5 years, these can change. But looking at our overall cost to operate and maintain the system, some years this will be different than others as far as that balance.
Yeah, it looks like they're all above the commercial up until
yeah,
30.
Councilmember, but not by a lot. If you remember the last cost of service study, it indicated that we were undercharging commercial and water and overcharging residential, and that's why you see the spread the way that you do. They found that we were pretty close with residential, commercial, shading commercial or residential a little more favorably under the old plan, and so this is meant to try to equalize that. But the numbers are still very close on the sewer side. It's water where we had the biggest differential.
Yeah, still, I'm going to speak up for the residents. You know how
Thank
I
you
am.
for that.
The Cheney East Dam repair from 2 slides ago, that's different than what we...
That's different than what we're working on.
Okay.
So the east of the main dam is basically just an earthen dam, and we did another analysis and determined we could put that off for now.
Okay. Are we doing anything to reach out to especially commercial businesses right now about altering some of their watering habits come spring? Because we all know, we've all gotten the emails from people, this business had their watering 3 times a week or in the middle of rain or anything like that. So are we reaching out and kind of relaying like this is the time to change your meters, your timers to make sure that you're within our drought plan?
We're working with the comms team on that. Our concern is as we go through the fall and winter months here with better temperatures, right, and the water demands are down already, that as we start to come around to spring, folks kind of might forget where we were at. So we're doing several things. I would tell you on November 8th, after the agenda review, I'm going to be talking to the council about updating on where we're at on a drought response plan and some of those issues that we're doing. We're trying to keep the word out there as much as we can. I'll tell you one thing we're doing is meeting with WABA and the development community in November to start talking about development and building standards going forward and water use. That doesn't necessarily apply to commercial. Well, I'll give you a quick example. One of the best things that we could do is go away from building new developments that's all fescue sod, right? It's going to be a hard sell. It's a quality of life issue. People like that, but fescue yards take more water than just about anything, and no matter where you're at. But we're going to start having those discussions so we can get input from the industry, get input from the public. But I think you hit on a tremendous point. And our goal, comms is working to have some billboard messaging through with the winter to talk about the fact that we're still in a drought, continue to conserve. Don't come around to February and March and reseed your yard and plant a lot of stuff that's going to need water. We've got to keep that message going forward just as we have to this point.
But Gary, you also, where you have received complaints and we have a specific address, we are investigating those. We have issued warnings. We go back and look at their accounts and their water use to determine whether there's validity to the complaint as well.
Yes, thank you. We've really stepped that enforcement up, especially on commercial businesses. When you get multiple locations, we have met specifically with them. Staff has talked to them about the need. We've had them provide proof that they've changed their timers and done those things. So we're going to continue to find all those ways that we can to make improvements.
Okay, appreciate that. And in the discussion that you'd have with WAVA, I've heard a lot of people talking about setting developments and houses up that are new builds for using recycled water as well. So just 2 cents on that one.
Same part of that discussion. Thank you. Yes.
The last thing I have, do we have any alternate sources for the fund to help out people with their water bills? Or is it just the donations only, essentially?
It's and sorry if I went over that too quick. We utilize 0.01% of the annual rates. which for 2025 is around $200,000. That's where we start with, because the donations to the fund, even though they've doubled, we're only about $9,000 so far this year. So the core of that comes from the commitment from the rates.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if there were any additional services or additional pots of revenue to help.
So
boost that
far,
up a
like I
little bit.
said, for what it's worth, in 2024, we're projecting a usage of $55,000. So based on what we've seen the last couple of years, I think we're in a pretty good place, balancing what the requests and the needs are.
Okay, appreciate it.
How much is in that fund right now?
I can get you that. I don't know that I know exactly what it's in right now. We had 192,000 for 2024, and we're projecting using 55,000. So my guess is by year end will be 140,000 left, something like that.
Just keeps accumulating year after year. If you don't use up all these funds, it will continue.
It does not necessarily continue accumulating. Next year, we'll start again with that 0.01%. It's all factored in for next year, all in of what needs to be done.
How much was utilized last year?
I don't know if I have that number from last year, but I can get you that number. So far, I mean, we've had this discussion in the past. So far, we just haven't seen that many requests. We're continuing to do everything we can to get word out there on how this works and who qualifies, but so far we haven't even needed the 1/100th of 1% to cover what the requests have been.
Is it something we can include in the water bill?
We have.
Okay.
We have, and that's where folks are notified that they can also contribute to the fund. Thank you. I know it was a lot of information, but I really appreciate your time.
Next item, or the last item, has to do with a request from the council on more information on our public art program and how much we have spent over the last 10 years and our direction.
All right, thanks for hanging in there and for this opportunity. Lindsay Banaka, Director of Arts and Cultural Services with the City Manager's Office. This is an overview at the request of council of a 10-year kind of checkup on our public art program, and since we started the Percent for Art ordinance a few years ago, kind of where were we before, where are we now? One thing I do want to point out just right away is that we've been in the public art industry really since the beginning. Our collection spans 132 years, dating back to 1892 with the Gargoyle series on the original City Hall that's now the Wichita-Sedgwick County Historical Museum. I think this just is really a testament to the city's commitment to our cultural legacy and the history in our community, and something that throughout the last 132 years we've continued to grow the collection in unique and different ways. In thinking about the City of Wichita's mission and how it connects with public art, I thought it would be a great kind of preface to showcase where public art falls into the city's mission overall. Our mission is to keep Wichita safe, grow our economy, build dependable infrastructure, and provide conditions for living well. And public art hits all of these points in unique and different ways. I do want to just highlight number 3, because I think that this is an area that maybe not everyone thinks about when they think about public art, but it's really a great source for an alternative solution to project challenges. So I want to highlight the 2 images we see here. I think we're probably most familiar with the troll, our beloved troll along the river. That project was a really unique opportunity for the community. There was a former stormwater retention basin, as I understand it, that was no longer operable. Instead of a huge environmentally impactful project that could have been very expensive, the project designer in the city at the time decided this could be an opportunity for art. So a really affordable solution that's really kind of been a fun opportunity for the community to wrap their head around, and it's now a beloved part of our rich public art tapestry. So it was a very affordable solution and one that has really transformed the way we view that space. And then the image on the top is artwork that the more I dive into our public art collection, the more I learn about it. And these wind organs, there's a series of them along the river trail just north of Delano. And this is a really unique opportunity for these windpipe organs to block or to kind of be a visual barrier between some infrastructure that would otherwise not be super aesthetically pleasing if you're on the river trail itself. So these wind organs were an opportunity to keep people from climbing on those infrastructure opportunities, that instead of doing fencing, we utilize public art as an alternative to both enhance the visitor experience as you're on the river corridor and to provide more safety to that infrastructure that we want to prevent the public from climbing on. Moving into our budget goals for the next year, we've heard loud and clear that there's some key areas that council would like us to focus on, and public art plays right into them. When thinking about crime prevention, there's a lot of studies about how public art in particular has an opportunity to prevent crime. It kind of goes towards the broken window theory, and we have pride of place and a sense of belonging. When we have aesthetically elevated spaces, they're much less likely to receive property damage. That's not always the case. It's not to say we never see graffiti or damages to public art, but it really has seen a national trend on preventing crime wherever there is public art integrated. In terms of economic development, I think this is where our beloved Keeper of the Plains comes into play. It's a great example of every night hundreds of visitors are coming to our community to view this work of public art, and the economic that is spurred because of that tourism and just that civic engagement can be seen over and over again. And improving roads. This is an area that maybe we don't always think about where public art comes into play. I've got some examples later on in the presentation, but public art is a really unique opportunity to really calm traffic in areas where there might be some confusing lanes or confusing turns. Public art is an opportunity to slow down traffic and help guide them through an area. We see it now as a national standard with roundabouts being a great opportunity for public art to slow traffic and really guide them in different areas. When we think about public art, it's not always just a sculpture in front of a building. Not to say it's not that, but it's also a whole bunch of other stuff. So it can be an integrated site-specific installation. It could include bridges and roadways, and for that, I would really like to challenge us to think about gateways and entryways into the community, whether that's along a major interstate or off of Main Street. We have a great gateway sculpture right off of Kellogg. Environmental and educational, we have educational panels throughout our urban environment, especially on our green belts and on our on the river trails. A lot of educational panels, even at Keeper Plaza, we have educational panels that talk about the history of our community. That's part of what we consider art and design projects. We have memorials and monuments. Veterans Memorial Park, that whole series of memorials is actually part of our public art collection. Unexpected encounters. Wichita has so many unexpected encounters within our public art collection that we should really be prideful of and really challenge ourselves to take a scavenger hunt amongst our collection. I think the troll is a great example. You don't often see pictures of it, and that's at the request of the artist. It's not on maps. It's supposed to be an Easter egg that you stumble upon, and it's got some lore attached to it, but we have a whole bunch of them throughout our pools. The Gerber bronzes across Douglas. I challenge everyone to look up at one of the stoplights, and there's a hawk on top of one of our stoplights. We have these unexpected encounters that really just help braid in our cultural tapestry into our community and make Wichita an interesting place.
Lindsay, you mentioned educational panels. I had the opportunity to be with Councilmember Hoheisel at Cowtown, where they have 3 educational panels that they would love to see somewhere along Delano, along the river. It talks about Wichita's history, and so I was just curious how that gets incorporated. How does that? They already bought the panel, so it's not anything that anyone needs to buy.
So I'm not exactly familiar with that project in particular, but in general, the Cowtown's artifact collection belongs to the board, so it's not city property. But if it's about putting educational panels along the river, that's something that we can definitely explore. Later in the presentation, I talk about all the gifts the community receives. We have a lot of art that's been gifted to the community that could be included within.
Well, knowing that there's improvements along the west side of the river, I was just curious how that could come into fruition.
Yeah. Well, we're willing to explore any opportunity as it presents itself. And just lastly, I think it's very intuitive, but public art celebrates our rich cultural diversity and our cultural and heritage preservation. And then just, if it's not clear, most public art that we have in our collection hits multiple ones of these bullet points. It's not just, this is an educational component. It could also be cultural. It could also be environmental. It's hard to talk about public art without looking at some, so I've got a lot of pictures riddled throughout our slides. I think all of these examples are ones that we've had throughout the history of our collection, but are maybe elements that aren't always considered public art, but really tell the story of our community. So the clock tower in Delano, I think we're all very familiar with it. That's part of our public art collection. We have a very beautiful airport that features art throughout it, including the educational panels. That was part of our art element or our art budget for that project. But the Ed Carpenter, it's called a loft, and I challenge you next time you're in the airport, these series of panels that span the entire entry of the terminal are just quite stunning as you're going up the escalator. Look up, it's a really stunning piece of our collection that anyone who's coming in or out of our community has the opportunity to enjoy. On the top right, you see a bus stop. That's artwork by Elaminique Bacchus, and that's kind of integrated design. The art is part of the overall bus stop itself. When we think about how we maintain and service the collection, it's really a collaborative approach from across many departments. The limestone walls along the Museums on the River complex, that's actually part of our public art collection. Those are site-specific works of art throughout that Museums on the River. And again, I'm going to make a lot of challenges today because I really think the community should celebrate this collection that we have. But along those museum signs, there's the elements of the river woven between it. So part of those kind of what could be seen as cracks are really the river that's going through those limestone walls. And then one of my personal favorites in the collection is the Lindbergh panel in the Kansas Aviation Museum that dates to 1935 by L.W. Clapp. Again, challenge you next time you're at the museum, look up at the facade of the building. It's a really stunning, gorgeous piece of our collection. Moving right along into our Arts and Cultural Strategic Plan that was passed earlier this year. It's all woven together in partnership with the city's overall mission. But I do want to just point out part of our surveying process and the planning process was we asked the community, where should the city be playing in the arts and cultural sector? And public art was the #1 respondent of the survey, with the most people saying that we should be in the public art industry. The other top 4 are listed there as well. Now looking at the Design Council, just kind of a general overview, our records indicate that we've had some sort of public art advisory board of some sort. It's changed names maybe a couple times, but in earnest since 1989, we've had some sort of governing body over our public art and aesthetic design. As it stands today, our Design Council is an 11-member appointed board that's appointed by the mayor, and it has a series of professions that are required. So we have to have 2 architects, 2 landscape architects, 2 engineers, 2 artists, 1 graphic artist, and 2 at-large seats. And I do just want to shout out that we are currently looking for a landscape architect. So if anyone's watching or knows of a landscape architect that would be interested in serving on this commission, we currently have a vacancy in that area. Those do follow our general boards and commissions guidelines, and they ultimately make recommendations to City Council. We meet once a month, every first Monday of the month at 10 a.m. These are volunteer positions. They're robust meetings because we really look at a lot of different areas of the city's CIP projects that are coming up. The purpose of the Design Council by the ordinance is to make recommendations to City Council of the incorporation of art and aesthetic design into public projects, to make recommendations to develop and define design criteria for public improvements, to make recommendations for the appropriateness of inclusion of public art and design into a project, and to serve as an advisory capacity to the city and to city staff, and really act as a liaison, bridging the gap between private entities and artists and arts groups. We have a lot of interested parties in the private sector who are curious, like, how do I put a mural in my building? Or I'm interested in having some sort of art incorporated into my new business. And we advise on that as well, and we steer them into the Design Council when it's appropriate. However, we don't necessarily have overview of that, but we provide consulting services along those elements.
Since you just mentioned the murals, would you be able to also share how community members can see City of Wichita public art murals versus community members and business owners who decide to invest and put art?
Sure, that's a great question. I've got a slide here coming up about our public art publicarchive.org, which is where the city's public art collection is listed in full. Just had a meeting last week with someone from the public who's really interested in, now that we've got the city's collection, the Ulrich's collection is also listed, there's all this other art. How do we get that listed as well? So there's kind of a crowdsourcing campaign that we're hoping to entertain as capacity permits coming up. But as it stands, anyone can submit known artwork into the Public Art Archive that we can hopefully build that map out even further. But publicartarchive.org is where you can see the city's collection in full, including our murals. So the Design Council does oversee the public art itself, but they're really overseeing all the different design elements that go into a different capital project. So this slide is just to showcase some of the elements that they look at. It can include flooring. The left image here is the new carpeting that's going into the Westlink Library development, along with like the different color swatches and types of wall coverings and floor coverings on the right. So they're really looking at the overview of the project and all the different design elements. It's not just public art that they're looking at or overseeing. And I do want to just illustrate that every project has some sort of wall covering, some sort of floor covering, so they all go through the Design Council at some point, regardless of if they have public art or not. They're all hitting it to make sure that we have continuity in design. So then the percent for our ordinance, which is a really exciting thing that the city should be really proud of. We adopted it in earnest in December of 2019 to formally establish the public art program by ordinance, to really set aside the funding program into the CIP. I want to reiterate that we've been doing this for many, many decades. The ordinance just changed how we do it. So it just sets the funding aside versus it being absorbed into the project budget. But we've been doing this for many, many decades. The ordinance provides the guidance for the funding, the selection, creation, and the maintenance. It could set aside maintenance funding for public art, of which our Design Council has approved these last few years, and establishes the responsibilities relating to the administration of the public art program. And I think that last part is really exciting. And in my 3 years that I've been with the city, we've been able to hire a public art manager, so now we have a dedicated staff member who's helping make sense of this all. So shout out to Jana, who's in the room, who's really just helped make sense of our 132-year-old collection, because we haven't had that dedicated person really tracking what we have, where it is, how did we get it. So this assignment for today was really exciting to look at the 10-year overview.
I have a question that might be applicable in this part. So what art do we have that is in storage right now? So I know we have the Lotus sleeves. I know we have one of the Joan Arcs. I know, what are some of the other pieces that we have?
We have a statue by Gene Salerno. I might have butchered his name. I'm trying to think of any others. We have a couple that are within offices that are more 2D, like paintings that haven't had a site identified, but they're not necessarily in storage, but aren't on public gaze. My guesstimate would be less than 10 pieces, but I'd be happy to kind of put together a listing and provide it to council.
Okay, thank you.
But it's not as many as I think the public might think that we have a large storage room or a large collection database that's offline. We do have several pieces that are, but we're a couple weeks ago, I think what prompted this presentation was the presentation for public art maintenance, where we're trying to get those works out of storage. And then maybe one other moment to talk about here, that we haven't done a full analysis of comp cities or peer cities, but in our brief analysis, we are a little bit behind the game. Tulsa's percent for art program dates to the late 60s. Des Moines, I think, is the early 90s. Even though we've been in this work, our ordinance is pretty far behind of where most of our peer cities are, but that's part of today's assignment that we didn't quite get fully to, but we're still working on the analysis to see what the national standard is across the board.
Are most of them 2%, or is that?
That's a tough question to answer, because our 2% is different. The total or the impact might be a different mark, but I would say on average they're between 1% and 3% as a national average. In our larger cities, you might see something a little bit different. Their funding mechanisms can vary greatly. I mean, and where it's located within a city can vary. In the city of Austin, it's part of their economic development department. In other communities, they put it to the nonprofit sector where they have the dedicated funding. I believe that's how Des Moines works, and then they have a foundation that's distributing or managing those projects. So it really can vary greatly.
Interesting that it's in the Economic Development Department in some places.
Yeah, well, I mean, when it's part of new builds or capital overlays, it makes sense to a certain degree, especially for a city like Austin that's doing these massive development projects. I think where it's poised within our city is very exciting too, because we work across all the different departments between Parks and Rec, Library, Public Works, where the projects are happening and who the project managers are. So while it's healthy to look at our peer cities, we still want our program to work for Wichita.
Appreciate it.
In looking at the funding itself, the ordinance states that an amount budgeted for capital improvement projects financed by GO at-large funding, LSD, or transient guest taxes. Projects that are identified as iconic projects are defined in the ordinance can independently have an amount not to exceed 2% of the project's budget added to the project cost or art aesthetic improvements. So that one's a little clunky. In my tenure, or since the ordinance was approved in December of 2019, we have not identified a project as such. So although that's within the ordinance, we haven't put it to work just yet. I think we've had a couple projects come up that maybe could have been identified as such, but weren't for whatever the reason, but we have not utilized that part of the ordinance just yet.
Which ones were those?
I think like Chester I. Lewis is a good example. It predates the ordinance when the project started, so it wouldn't have been identified at the time the project was initiated, but I think we can, I would say it's an iconic project of public art for the community. And then percent for art funds are to be used for selection, installation, administration, and maintenance of artworks. Moving forward into the funding allocation itself, department directors and staff present annually to the Design Council what new capital improvement projects are coming up, or if the CIP has changed year to year. We see some projects go on the agenda or on the project list, and for whatever the reason, they might be pushed back, they might be moved up. So we work with the Design Council to showcase where we think projects are going to fall in the lineup and what might be a good project for art funding consideration, and as such, what the appropriate level for funding would be. The Design Council then designates the art budget for the capital improvement projects. Again, they have 2% of the overall CIP to use. And the criteria that they look like is really twofold: the community impact and public interest, and the significance of the location. Those aren't the only determining factors, but those are two main criteria that we look at when determining if a project would be eligible or should be considered for art funding. Okay. How public art is commissioned, we have done some changes in this area over the last couple of years. Really, we've taken the selection of artists outside of the Project Prime team, if you will, and we've done a separate call for artists to make sure that there's equitable access to the opportunities. That's something that was very clear when I started with the community, that they knew we were spending money on art but didn't have access to the opportunities or weren't sure how to get involved. So we've now pulled that part of the project out and kind of separated. So we now do open calls anytime we are going to hire an artist or art consultant for a project. You see a graphic here for a call that we currently have open for the Arkansas River Corridor project. So we do that separately. The project prime, or the lead architect or construction manager, is part of that selection process, because ultimately the artist or art consultant will be a sub under them. But we've pulled that out just to make sure that there's equitable opportunity to participate. And we issue them through CAFE, or callforentry.org. This is the national standard for posting calls to art. Since we've done this, we've seen a huge response from national artists interested in participating, which has been really exciting. And we've also seen our local artists elevate to further understand how they can be successful in bidding on projects. And then it's also helped our local artists understand and learn about opportunities outside of the community. So we're furthering the development of the professionalism of our local artists. We have a selection committee for each project that's comprised of city staff, the project design team itself, different stakeholders and community members. Really, each project has its own unique identity. So the selection committee for the art can really vary project to project. We've also started including local artists on that selection committee who are interested in participating but maybe haven't successfully gone through the project yet or gone through a call, so that they learn how our process works. I like to use an example of the first time I wrote a grant, I didn't get it, and then I served on a grant review committee, and I was like, oh, that's how you write a grant. That's kind of our philosophy here, is to make sure that local artists kind of understand how it works, and once they see everyone's submissions on a national level, that they're elevating their experience as well. In terms of project management, art consultants and artists work collaboratively with the prime consultant, the design team in the city, through the concept design itself, through design development, fabrication, and installation. We like to say that the art is baked into a project. It's not just art that's put on the project at the end. Sometimes we're really successful in this, sometimes we're not, but we are working to make sure that the art is really baked into the project from day one. Art and design projects are brought to the Design Council for approval prior to the RFQ being issued. So when the project knows it's going to have art, they bring that call to the Design Council to say, here's where we think we're going to have the art. We're looking for a sculpture. We're looking for this type of artist. We're looking for this type of media to be used. We think this is a local call or this is an international call. The Design Council then approves the RFQ process itself and the issuance of that RFQ, and then the art comes back at least twice, at 30% design and 90% design. Often it comes back for a final design, so that the Design Council is part of it every step of the way in the development of the project. And I might just point out at this point that not every project has an art consultant, actually very few do. It's really projects that have multiple artists working on them or more sizable budgets, or a project that might have more cultural sensitivity or site-specificness that requires just some additional support. Okay. Now here's where I have some updates on this slide from when this presentation was submitted. So I handed out earlier at the beginning of this meeting, and hopefully Councilmember Tuttle, if you're still listening, you received this via email, the list of public funding by district, or public art spending by district over the last 10 years. This was a really interesting assignment to trying to figure out where things fell into the timeline of things. But just for those watching or those listening, the updated numbers are for District 1, about $1.8 million being spent across 6 or 7 projects over the last 10 years. In District 2, only 1 project at $225, and also at District 3, $225 across 1 project. Then we have some changes in the following ones. So in District 4, we estimate about $1.8 million across 3 projects. That includes the airport, riverfront stadium, and the aquatics master plan part of it. So very sizable projects making up that $1.8 million. In District 5, we estimate $280,000 across 2 projects, including a pool, harvest pool, and Proct wetlands. In Council District 6, we have a whole bunch of projects that total about $3 million based on our estimates. Of course, as soon as I submitted this, even this morning, we thought of a couple other projects that we weren't quite sure where to put. So Nafsker Park and Jackie Robinson Plaza, by all means, have creative design elements within them, but they weren't necessarily part of our Present for Art program. So we weren't quite sure where to put them, but they are listed at the bottom, as well as a larger list on your handout of projects that are currently in the works or are anticipated to start coming soon.
This slide right here shows all districts at 1.2 million for pools. Was there anything additional to this?
So that's where the handout that you have breaks the pools down per district. We had 5 pools that were part of that in, I believe, 4 districts. District 6 has 2 pools. So we really distributed those between the pools, between the districts evenly. And that's where it's kind of tricky because many districts, you all differ so much in thinking of which district has a library versus which district has multiple pools. We know there's users of all districts, users of all these facilities coming from different districts, but the art spending is really related to what project is happening in the district. So the project itself drives the placement of art. The art isn't selected by district, if that makes sense. It's tricky to explain. So moving on, I do want to just reiterate that we have public art throughout the community, and this is Mayor, you beat me to the punch on publicartarchive.org. We have over 300 works accessioned into our public art collection. About 205, I believe, are listed on publicartarchive.org as we're trying to update that. But you can search it by map, you can search it by type of artist, by media, by the title of work, and more. But we encourage you to check out publicartarchive.org.
Can I ask a quick question?
of course.
On the one, the picture with the highway,
Yes.
windmill, are those weeds covering up the art?
It's in the eye of the beholder, I might offer.
It looks like weeds.
It could be part of the landscape. I would say the art component that we were responsible for would be the relief in the wall itself.
Someone will be offended. That's native planting that is
Native planting?
intended to be there as part of the project.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
You can see the flowering on the left-hand side of the.
A lot of weeds have flowers too.
Those are a little better defined.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Moving
We'll
right.
never get that landscape architect on the design council now.
I do have a breakdown of projects by district and by budget that we can fly through, or I'm happy to answer questions as I'm able to about specific ones. For this project in particular, this was a new airport terminal. I do have an update. It's TBD listed on the slide, but our art budget for it was $875,000, and that's that Ed Carpenter piece and the informational panels that you see throughout the main entrance to the facility. We also did a project across Redbud. We had 3 pause points, is what we call them, of installations that celebrate our rich cultural identity. And those 3 pause points were $222,000 and were acquisition in 2015. I do have a correction here. This is in District 1. This is the Commerce Rail Yard parking. There's a stage and some wheat stock elements or lighting elements that you see throughout. That's from 2017. We have a series of murals under the train tracks at 1st and 2nd Street. Those are from 2018. This is another project budget that it took us a minute to find the number on, but this is the sculptures that are along the river, near the River Vista apartment complex, and we spent $442,000 on the art installation, on the aesthetic design of that area. This is at the Advanced Learning Library. I'm sorry, if I go back, this project was $400,000. The library project was $442,000, and we have several works of art integrated throughout the Advanced Learning Library. We have art in the underpass on the pedestrian railings on Douglas under the train tracks. We call these hobo railing, and it was designed by Jeff Bess of LK Architecture. This project is from 2019 and some integrated design elements and pause points. There's 5 art installations from I-35 to Hillside. Proc Wetlands has seen a couple different phases of art and has an upcoming phase as well. In 2019, we spent just shy of $200,000 with RDG Art Studio for this integrated design, the Lotus Blind itself. This is where we have some interesting educational panels, and the blind itself is part of our art collection. And this project did receive an Excellence in Design Award from ASLA Central States. It was tough to pick pictures from the Riverfront Stadium, but the stadium is just covered in art. We completed this project in 21, and our project budget was $680,000. We have so many murals throughout the facility. I picked one that's one of my favorites, but in all of the restrooms actually in the complex, there's really fun murals that would be wonderful selfie spots. But then there's also some integrated design elements. The picture on the right is actually a bike rack that, seen at different angles, makes up the Wichita flag. We also have, I would say, specialty lighting elements and different integrated design elements throughout this whole complex. Harry Street Bridge is a recent acquisition in 2021. We spent $225,000 on this project. The Aquatics Master Plan, that's where we had it previously listed in all districts, but then we're able to break it down district by district. Across 5 pools, we spent about $1.2 million for some really significant works of art. Here you have Orchard Pool, that actually the trees themselves that make up the shading elements over the seating area are part of our art collection. This is East Kellogg. We spent about $225,000 on the design fees of this project. This is an interesting project to kind of figure out where the art is or isn't, or kind of what our scope of services was. This is maybe a good example where we would have been doing some sort of construction or concrete form liners anyway, but we had an artist involved to make that more of an exciting welcome gateway into the community. Evergreen Community Center and Library. In 2022, we installed several wonderful murals by Heather Byers, Armando, and Carlos.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, just a quick comment. That was it's District 6, not 4.
My apologies.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
fine.
In District 1, we have Chester I. Lewis Park. I would like to point out that this budget includes private funding that helps support the art in this project. One of our more recent acquisitions is on the Amadid Bridge, the light columns by artist Dan Geegan. And then one of our projects that's currently in the work and getting a lot of attention is at the Wichita Waterworks. I do want to point out that we still have one sculpture that's anticipating installation. Actually found out yesterday that it might be January of 2025 before it gets installed. We had to have a little bit of a shipping delay, but we do have one more piece coming at the Wichita Waterworks.
Have you had any good comments on that at all?
Absolutely, we have.
Have you?
Yeah, the artist
I sure haven't.
Well, I think Sija Chen's work that's pictured here, she came out to the community several times, met with school students, met with university students about the integrated design approach, and their design elements are incorporated into the benches themselves. And that process of community development through art was such a meaningful opportunity for those who were involved. So those who were involved absolutely loved it. The bike path is relatively new and still in progress. So I think once the bike path is finished and that whole project is finished, I think the community might change their minds a little bit about that project.
It's only got one way to go, so.
Lindsay,
Yes.
the final piece that's still missing, can you talk about that piece? What is that piece?
I can get back to you on it with specifics, but it's quite a large sculptural element that's going to go along the bike path in the tree line right in front of the building. So here you can kind of see the water droplet in the very far distance. It'll be to the right of that along the bike path as well, but it's an environmental sculpture that's inspired by the ecology of water, and happy to provide some more information about it. I will say it's the largest, most significant piece that's part of this project itself. Moving on into gifts, we've received quite a few gifts over the last 10 years, including Operation Freedom Memorial at Veterans Memorial Park. This is one of my favorite pieces in our collection, this Black Bear Bosun that's on display at the Mid-America All-Indian Museum. The picture really doesn't do it justice because it's 36 feet long and 8.5 feet tall. We also received some murals through the Horizontes Community Project that was funded by the Knight Foundation, Humanities Kansas, and the Kansas Arts Commission. Some additional murals through that same project. There's another mural on the Evergreen Library building that was gifted to the community through a similar project, through the Horizontes Communities Mural Project. The Tyrannosaurus Rex in front of the Museum of World Treasures was a gift to the city, and it proudly sits in front of that museum. That's part of our collection. We have a series of 2D works that have also been gifted to us over the years. This is one of Anthony Dozier, a prominent local artist, his gift to the community. Another painting, this one is on display at the Advanced Learning Library in one of the boardrooms. This was a gift of the Arts Council as part of a community drawing project, as I understand it. The mural in the Maya Angelou Library was a gift to the community in 2021. Very recently, we had a gift of the artist, John Waltner, of True Colors. This is a mobile that's on display in the Advanced Learning Library. We recently had a sculpture by Roland Karg of Karg Art Glass in Keachai donate a sculpture to the city that's on display in Old Town. And then these are just some examples of additional projects that might come into fruition. So the work on the left, Big Red by David Stoltz, is on view in front of the Advanced Learning Library. This is a piece that was in storage, as I understand it, for a long time. It was maybe a gift to the community, or how we acquired it is still a little bit unknown to me personally, but it had been in restoration and conservation for many years, and we were really excited to put this out on display last year in front of the library. It's from 1985, but the community hasn't viewed it in many years, so we're excited to bring this out. And then the mural on the right is a restroom facility in one of our parks in Harrison Park on the southeast side. This is part of a collection of murals that was gifted to us by the artist and his cohort. These popped up this past summer. We have a lot of murals throughout our parks program. We recently unveiled a mural at the Great Plains Nature Center over the weekend that was donated to the community or part of a larger granting process. We had a new series of murals go up at Lynette Woodard Recreation Center. We have artistic benches throughout our parks. We've got art everywhere. That doesn't necessarily mean it's accession into our public art collection, but we will champion it anywhere we can. And we're so thankful for the community members, the individual artists, and the projects that have come to fruition that have gifted these opportunities to the community. This is a listing of projects in development. It's by no means an exhausted list. I think the handout that you have that has the ongoing project list, that's perhaps a little bit more accurate, but these are all projects that are in some sort of development phase at the moment, or we're wrapping them up still. And then as part of today's assignment, we wanted to talk about destination parks. These are the 7 parks that we've identified as destination parks, and Reggie was not able to be here today, but he provided me with some language that a destination park is a large, inclusive park that's designated or designed to attract people from other communities. So it's not just for local residents, though it definitely is for them, but it is also to attract people from other communities. They're usually multi-generational and feature a variety of play elements and equipment in the area. Destination parks are often customized designs to highlight locations of history or culture and incorporate natural elements. They can also be a major attraction for local residents and visitors. Of note, I just want to point out some development that we've had at O.J. Watson. We do have a public art project coming up at that site, but I think a great example of a recent investment that we've done there is the Seasons venue that opened up in recent years.
Would Riverside not count as a destination park?
Not necessarily. I think it could be. This was a list provided by Reggie.
Do you know if the city has any of Gino Salerno's wooden sculptures, like the Rapunzel or the Mermaid or any of that stuff that used to be? I think some of it got damaged, but
yeah.
Do we still have any of that, or is that the city's?
We have one that's in storage. And then I do know that Botanica has several within their children's garden that are by him. So those were funded by Botanica Inc., but in a city facility, they become city property. And with that, that's all I have for you. I'm happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
I'm very appreciative of this presentation and really appreciated seeing all the different public art pieces in all the different areas of our community. My question really is more about maintenance. So I really like that we keep adding, but how are we maintaining, and is there a deficit? Do we need to put more into maintenance?
So that's a great question, thank you. Definitely as we grow our collection, we want to be mindful of maintenance. Something that we've instituted in the last couple of years, especially now that we do the full RFQ, and part of the contract we have with the artists is that they give us a detailed maintenance plan so that we know how to care and protect it. I think one of the differences between some of the community projects I mentioned, the restrooms at park facilities, one of the reasons they're not in our public art collection formally is we don't really have capacity to maintain those. So those we kind of separate out. For the works that are developed and designed and acquired through our Percent for Art program, those we want to definitely maintain in perpetuity or until they no longer serve the community. With those detailed maintenance plans, and as we are still trying to wrap our heads around the whole collection, currently we have $160,000 a year through the CIP for art maintenance. This year, 2024, is our first year implementing those funds. If we have those funds in perpetuity, or we have them lined out in the next 10 years of the CIP, we believe that's going to help get us back on track. It's hard to say we would need more money, although I'm sure we would find something to do with it. But we think that that number is sufficient to get us out of any sort of backlog that we may have.
I've also had community members interested in providing benches. So how does that work when a community member wants to provide art?
I would encourage them to reach out to myself or to Jana Irwin, our public art manager. Really depends on if they have a location in mind. If it's part of a park or a memorial, that we might steer it to the department itself, because we always want to ask them, does it serve a purpose in your community or at the site? We've had someone reach out about an airport project, wanting to donate a bust of Eisenhower to the airport. Could that be appropriate? How would that work? So I think it's really case by case. We entertain them. We reach out to the departments and their various advisory boards. Ultimately, any public art that's accessioned into the city's collection has to be approved by the design council.
Lastly, I love seeing all the murals around the community. I know that you highlighted a few of them, but there's a very exhaustive list of murals all throughout Wichita. Is there one place just for the murals?
In terms of a listing on Public Art Archive, you can search by type of art, so you can select art or mural in the criteria that you're looking for, and it will show you all the murals that are actively listed there.
And it could be private individuals that can put that into the system?
Yes. I would say they're not currently there, but the public could implement them into the software or into the platform.
Lindsay, thank you. I don't mean to be too critical on the water treatment plant, but I just don't see $1.2 million worth of art there yet. And maybe I'll be wooed by the final piece. And maybe that water drop is cool, but it's so close to the building light kind of diminishes the light coming through it. Maybe it could be resited somewhere. Just an idea. Not an art expert at all. And I do appreciate a lot of the art around the city. I do really like it. So just thank you for doing a great job. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Fair enough. I would say just art is for everyone, but that doesn't mean that everyone likes every single piece of art. I think we want to make sure we have something for everyone in the collection. And hopefully you find a favorite piece somewhere else in the collection. We do have the capacity with sculptures that they can be recited as needed. We did recite the work that has not been installed was supposed to go somewhere else in the facility, but then we realized, the sight lines just don't work, that the community is not going to be able to enjoy it. So we've then recited it to its going to be current location when it is cited. So you're not seeing $1.2 million there because it's not there.
Okay.
So we can reassess when it's out there what you think about it.
Okay, thank you.
Lindsay, I know we may do this in some locations. I know we actually do this in some locations as well, but in particular, my office, I have pieces and collection items from the Wichita Aviation Museum or the Kansas Aviation Museum, and Ben's going to yell at me for saying Wichita Aviation Museum. Kansas Aviation Museum. And I think it would be great if we had opportunities in all of our public buildings to display collection items that are at our museums that aren't necessarily, or that could be permissible to leave the museum. I know there are some pieces that have to stay there for security reasons, but I mean, even if it's the Public Works building or something else that we're displaying the artwork from a lot of our museum collections, maybe that inspires people to go to the museums if it's collection pieces that can leave the museum as well.
Yeah, I think that last part is where we get a little bit tricky. As long as we can maintain the safety and security of those items, that kind of really dictates where it can go. All of our museums have unique collections management policies. Not all the collections belong to the city, so it gets kind of tricky of what we can and can't distribute and what their loan policies are and what their advisory boards permit. But it's something definitely we would love to explore. More art for more people everywhere is always a win for me, so happy to explore that further.
Good afternoon, Lindsay. Appreciate the thorough report that you've done here. It's quite a bit in here. I do appreciate it and all of the art that we do have around the city, because I know sometimes I think we overestimate our ability for economic development when report after report after report that comes out talks about things like the arts and the parks and whatnot actually driving and bringing businesses here because they want to higher quality of life. So I do appreciate all the work that we've done. My little south side thing over here, I would like to see some more on the south side. Pretty stark to see if you look at the map, just everything north of Kellogg, south of Kellogg. I understand downtown's going to be the center of a lot of it, but we do have some money from some Hyatt funds for murals in the 3rd District. I just want to put that out there now, just in that way. If anybody's watching, we would love to have more murals there, and we do have some funding, and I'm excited to see, as we go along with the Plainview project, seeing something similar to what they've done at some of the other neighborhood resource centers and community centers, making sure that just the diversity of the community is celebrated, the diversity of the 3rd District hopefully will be celebrated at the Plainview Center as well. So aside from that, thank you for all your work on this.
Thank you. If I may, just thank you for prompting the economic impact opportunity. We know what the local nonprofit arts and culture sector drives in terms of our economic prosperity. We don't have really good data on public art itself, but I think if we look at national standards, public art that may or may not have been popular when it was installed, we know are huge drivers of tourism and economic development. I think the Bean in Chicago is like a perfect example of when it went up, the community was like, what is this? But now it's a must stop whenever you go there. Statue of Liberty, our most iconic work of art, probably in our communal history collection in the US, a major driver of a lot of economic activity. So I think we should be really proud of the collection that we have. Our Keeper of the Plains is drawing hundreds of visitors every single night to our community. And we should be really proud of it, that this is something that we should celebrate, that our collection spans 132 years. We're not new to this game, although we definitely have areas for improvement and would love to see more. We've got a really, really wonderful collection. And we'd love to put some more on the south side. I want to reiterate that the CIP project drives the opportunity for art. That's really our only mechanism to acquire art right now. Unless there's a CIP project in that area or in that district that we can put an art project on, or if we get a project donated to the community, those are really our only 2 opportunities right now to acquisition art.
Lindsay, I want to say thank you for the presentation, you and your team, for putting this together so quickly. This was wonderful. I know it's not everything, but 132 years of seeing how we've continued to invest in beautifying our community, or in the words of Councilmember Total, public design. I think this is more evidence that we need to continue doing so, and definitely appreciate it. Seeing this, the projects that are on the way, the projects that Councilmember Hoheisel was talking about in South Wichita, for me, that's just as more motivation to keep going and adding more to it. I think the maintenance conversation, as I've continued to say, is important, and I feel like that should be in the CIP, but I don't see a reason why we should slow down on the new pieces and new design. And every time we have the opportunity for a new building or new structure in the city of Wichita, having some form of artistic design to it, I think is key, because that's a piece that will last for decades. And, you know, I always use the fire station at 21st and Hillside. People always talk about how that was designed, and the artistic elements there. And for me, that's just motivation to make sure that's always a part of what we're doing.
Thank you.
I'm just going to echo this for the community. We have a lot of individuals in community that provide also public art, and I am appreciative that people make an investment in helping with public art as well. And so I'm going to encourage people to submit their murals into the system so that there is a comprehensive list. And when people say, where are the murals, we can point them to not just the City of Wichita murals, but murals that, again, are public art for everyone to enjoy, even though we may not be paying for it.
Thank you.
Not to prolong this, I do want to emphasize that public art is about community building. And as we have expanded our collection, especially in the last 5 years, we've provided more and more opportunities for people to see themselves in the art that we provide. And I think that inclusion is really important. I think it goes back to what Councilmember Hoheisel said for his district. I've talked to one or two of you about this. I just came back from Cincinnati, talked about economic development impact. They have an immersive art festival for 4 days in downtown Cincinnati. They estimate over that 4-day period, they draw 2 million people to their downtown, and their low estimate for economic impact in the community is $125 million. I've seen numbers that are as high as over $200 million. So big business over a 4-day period. So there are opportunities here, I think, for us to make a mark, not just with our everyday residents, but also for visitors and through, to our community. So with that, Mayor, that's all we have for the workshop.
Thank you very much.